What if everything you learned about human civilization is a carefully crafted lie? Right now, somewhere in the world, archaeologists are uncovering evidence that challenges every textbook, every timeline, every comfortable assumption about our past. Ancient texts buried for millennia contain testimonies so disturbing that entire religious councils voted to erase them from history. Giants walked among us, beings from beyond our world mingled with humanity. And when their offspring threatened to consume everything, a global catastrophe reset the entire planet. You might think these sound like fantasy stories, but the evidence spans continents and cultures that never contacted each other. The same impossible accounts appear everywhere, from forgotten caves in Israel to clay fragments in Iraq, from Irish legends to Native American oral traditions. Something happened in our distant past that was so significant, so world-changing, that echoes of it survived in every corner of human memory. Yet mainstream academia refuses to acknowledge these connections. University professors dismiss them as coincidence. Museums bury the artifacts that don't fit. Government agencies classify documents that raise uncomfortable questions. Why this coordinated silence? What truth could be so threatening that it must remain hidden? Tonight, we're going to dive deep into one of history's most suppressed documents, a manuscript so dangerous that early church leaders banned it from the Bible, so controversial that it vanished from Western civilization for over 1,000 years. This isn't speculation or theory. These are actual testimonies from people who claim to witness events that shaped our world in ways we're not supposed to understand. The journey begins in 1946, with a discovery that would shake biblical scholarship to its core. Along the desolate shores of the Dead Sea, young Bedouin shepherds were searching for a stray goat when they stumbled upon caves containing pottery jars filled with ancient scrolls. Among these manuscripts lay a complete book that had been deliberately excluded from biblical canon mind-seared the Book of Enoch. This wasn't the brief mention of Enoch found in Genesis, just a few sentences about a man who walked with God. This was an extensive 5-volume testimony describing journeys through multiple heavens, detailed conversations with angels, and first-hand accounts of events that preceded Noah's flood. The text reads like an eyewitness report from someone who actually experienced these encounters. According to this ancient testimony, celestial beings called Watchers were originally sent to observe humanity from a distance. Their mission was simple: watch, record, report back. They were forbidden from interfering with human development or revealing heavenly secrets. But something went catastrophically wrong. These Watchers abandoned their posts and descended to Earth, taking human wives and producing hybrid offspring called Nephilim. These weren't ordinary giants. They possessed supernatural strength, consumed massive amounts of resources, and eventually developed appetites for human flesh. The text describes them as beings who devoured all the acquisitions of men until humanity could no longer sustain their presence. The corruption spread beyond just physical consumption. These fallen Watchers taught forbidden knowledge to humans: Mars advanced metallurgy, weapon making, cosmetics, astrology, and other secrets that were supposedly too advanced for primitive humanity. This knowledge transfer accelerated human development in ways that violated cosmic order. As the Nephilim multiplied and their violence increased, the cries of suffering humanity reached the highest levels of creation. The response was swift and final. A global flood would cleanse the earth, drowning the giants and imprisoning the fallen Watchers in subterranean chambers until final judgment. But here's where the story becomes even more intriguing. Enoch himself was chosen as a mediator between the condemned Watchers and divine authority. They begged him to petition for mercy, to argue their case before the throne of creation. His response reveals the hopelessness of their situation. Their punishment was irreversible, their offspring doomed to destruction. What makes this account so compelling isn't just its detail, but how perfectly it aligns with flood narratives found across completely separate cultures. The Sumerians described Itnapishtim surviving a divine deluge in a massive boat. Hindu texts mention Manu being warned by a fish avatar to build a vessel before cosmic waters overwhelmed the world. Chinese legends tell of Gun and Yu battling primordial floods. Native American tribes from coast to coast preserve stories of world-destroying waters and survivor families. Modern geology confirms that massive flooding events occurred at the end of the last ice age, Rising sea levels from melting glaciers would have inundated coastal civilizations across multiple continents. The timing matches perfectly with the transition period between ancient hunter-gatherer societies and the sudden emergence of advanced agricultural civilizations around 10,000 years ago. Consider the archaeological mysteries that mainstream science struggles to explain. In Lebanon, the foundation stones at Baalbek weigh over 800 tons each, carved and positioned with precision that challenges modern engineering capabilities. Egyptian sarcophagi and underground chambers at Saqqara are sized for beings much larger than normal humans. Siberian mountains contain precisely cut granite blocks, weighing thousands of tons, moved to elevations that defy conventional explanation. Ancient texts consistently attribute these megalithic constructions to giants or divine beings rather than ordinary human labor. The same pattern appears globally in anemic possible stoneworks connected to legends of giant builders who lived before the Great Flooding. The Anunnaki of Mesopotamian texts were described as those who from heaven to earth came, bringing knowledge of agriculture, astronomy, and governance. Greek mythology tells of gods descending to produce demigod offspring of extraordinary abilities. Irish legends speak of the Tuatha De Danann, supernatural beings who ruled before humans. Norse sagas describe frost giants who predated the current world order. Even relatively recent historical accounts mention encounters with giant beings. Medieval travelers documented meetings with enormous humans in Africa and Asia. European explorers in Patagonia reported indigenous tribes of exceptional height. Archaeological discoveries of oversized skeletal remains occasionally surface in news reports before mysteriously disappearing into private collections or government storage facilities. The Book of Enoch was widely accepted by early Christian communities. Church fathers like Clement of Alexandria and Tertullian quoted it as authentic scripture. Jewish sects preserved and studied it for centuries. Then something changed. During the formation of the official biblical canon, this book was deliberately excluded from accepted texts. It vanished from Western Christianity, surviving only in complete form within Ethiopian Orthodox tradition. Why this systematic removal? Perhaps because the Book of Enoch presents a version of human origins that contradicts official narratives of gradual, independent development. It suggests that our civilization received outside intervention, that our knowledge came from forbidden sources, that our history includes chapters involving non-human intelligence. These aren't comfortable ideas for institutions that prefer humanity to see itself as the sole architect of its own progress. The implications challenge fundamental assumptions about our place in the universe, our relationship with higher powers, and the true nature of ancient catastrophes that reset human civilization. Tonight we're going to examine these suppressed testimonies with fresh eyes, following the evidence wherever it leads, regardless of how unsettling the destination might be. The testimony of Enoch doesn't exist in isolation. When we examine humanity's oldest written records, carved into clay tablets thousands of years before the Dead Sea Scrolls were hidden, we discover accounts so remarkably similar that they appear to describe identical events from different perspectives. Deep in the river valleys of ancient Mesopotamia, between the flowing waters of the Tigris and Euphrates, the Sumerian civilization developed the world's first known writing system. Their cuneiform tablets, some dating back over 4 millennia, contain detailed records of encounters with powerful entities they called the Anunnaki, literally meaning those who descended from the sky. Unlike distant deities dwelling in unreachable realms, these Anunnaki were described as physical beings who established direct contact with humanity. They didn't observe from afar mice as they participated actively in human affairs, establishing kingdoms, teaching advanced sciences, and fundamentally altering the course of human development. According to Sumerian records, these sky-born entities were responsible for humanity's most significant technological leaps. The sudden transition from primitive hunter-gatherer tribes to sophisticated city-states equipped with written languages, mathematical systems, astronomical knowledge, and complex metallurgy has always puzzled historians. How did scattered nomadic groups simultaneously develop identical innovations across vast geographical distances? Sumerian texts provide a startling explanation. This knowledge wasn't gradually discovered through trial and error, that was deliberately transmitted by non-human teachers. The Anunnaki supposedly instructed humans in agriculture techniques, architectural principles, governmental structures, and cosmic sciences, that would normally require centuries of independent development. But the most disturbing parallels emerge when these Mesopotamian accounts describe what happened when cosmic boundaries were violated. Just like the Watchers in Enoch's testimony, the Anunnaki eventually abandoned their roles as detached instructors and formed intimate relationships with human females. These forbidden unions produced hybrid offspring beings who possessed both mortal and divine characteristics. The Sumerians called these mixed-breed descendants heroes, kings, and sometimes monsters. They were celebrated in epic literature for their superhuman abilities, yet simultaneously feared for their destructive appetites and violent temperaments. These weren't ordinary humans, they were giants whose physical and mental capabilities far exceeded normal human limitations. When their aggression and consumption threatened the stability of civilization itself, Sumerian texts describe how divine judgment was executed through a global catastrophe. The gods supposedly decided to reset the entire world through an overwhelming deluge that would eliminate both the hybrid giants and cleanse the earth of corruption. This narrative framework appears throughout Mesopotamian literature, most famously in the Epic of Gilgamesh, Neoneti's oldest known literary masterpiece. Archaeological teams working in the ruins of Nineveh uncovered hundreds of clay tablets containing multiple versions of this epic poem, which has survived nearly 5,000 years of human history. Gilgamesh himself was described as 2/3 divine, 1/3 human Deel, clearly identifying him as one of these hybrid beings. During his quest for immortality secrets, he encounters Utnapishtim, the sole human survivor of the Great Flood. Utnapishtim's account of building a massive vessel to preserve his family and animal species during the cosmic deluge bears unmistakable similarities to the biblical story of Noah. Biblical scholars openly acknowledge that Genesis flood narratives were influenced by these older Mesopotamian traditions. However, the most significant detail often gets overlooked. In every version of these flood accounts, the catastrophe is directly connected to the existence of hybrid beings who represented a fundamental violation of natural order. This wasn't merely divine punishment for generic human wickedness. It was a cosmic intervention designed to eliminate specific genetic contamination that threatened the integrity of human DNA. The flood served as a planetary sterilization event, resetting biological and spiritual conditions to their original parameters. Modern geological research adds compelling scientific support to these ancient testimonies. Studies of the Black Sea region reveal evidence of catastrophic flooding approximately 7,500 years ago, when rising ocean levels from melting glaciers burst through the Bosphorus Strait with tremendous force. The scale of this flooding was unprecedented, equivalent to 200 Niagara Falls pouring continuously for months. Coastal settlements throughout the region would have been instantly submerged, forcing massive population migrations across continents. The timing of this geological event corresponds perfectly with the transition period between Paleolithic hunter-gatherer societies and the sudden emergence of advanced Neolithic agricultural civilizations. Archaeological evidence suggests that multiple advanced civilizations appeared simultaneously around the globe following this flooding period, all possessing remarkably similar technological knowledge, despite being geographically isolated from each other. This pattern supports the ancient accounts of knowledge being preserved and redistributed by survivors who possessed information from pre-flood civilizations. What proves most unsettling isn't just the flood itself, but the consistent testimony that pre-flood humanity coexisted with non-human entities of superior physical and intellectual capabilities. The Book of Enoch called them Watchers. Sumerian texts identified them as Anunnaki. Later cultural traditions would rename them Titans in Greece, Tuatha De Danann in Ireland, Jotun in Norse mythology. Despite emerging from completely separate cultural contexts across different continents and time periods, these traditions describe virtually identical characteristics: beings of enormous physical stature, supernatural abilities, advanced technological knowledge, and complex relationships with human populations that ultimately led to catastrophic consequences. Even specific geographical locations remain consistent across these separate accounts. Mount Hermon, located on the modern border between Lebanon and Syria, is identified in both the Book of Enoch and Mesopotamian texts as the precise landing site where these skyborne entities first descended to Earth. Archaeological surveys of Mount Hermon reveal extensive ancient ruins, altar complexes, and sanctuary structures scattered across its peaks. Evidence of long-term religious significance dating back thousands of years. Babylonian versions of the Gilgamesh epic specifically reference Mount Hermon as a dwelling place of divine beings, creating textual connections that span multiple civilizations. These geographical correlations challenge conventional explanations of independent mythological development. Instead of isolated cultural inventions, the evidence suggests shared historical memory of actual events that were gradually transformed into legendary narratives through centuries of oral transmission. Physical evidence continues to support these ancient accounts. At Baalbek in Lebanon, 3 foundation stones known as the trilithon weigh over 800 tons each. These precisely cut limestone blocks were somehow transported from quarries and positioned with engineering accuracy that challenges modern construction capabilities. Conventional archaeology attributes these achievements to Roman engineering, yet Roman historical records contain no descriptions of moving such massive stones. Local Lebanese traditions have always maintained that these were the works of giants who possessed strength far beyond normal human capacity. Similar megalithic mysteries appear worldwide. In Egypt, granite sarcophagi large enough to hold beings of extraordinary size sit empty in underground chambers at Saqqara. In Peru, precisely fitted stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons form walls that modern equipment would struggle to construct. In Russia, massive granite formations on remote mountains show evidence of precise cutting and positioning that defies conventional explanation. Ancient accounts consistently attribute these impossible constructions to giant beings rather than ordinary human labor. The Greeks described the gigantomachy in war between gods and giants that reshaped the landscape. Biblical texts mention the sons of Anak, giants so enormous that Hebrew scouts felt like grasshoppers in comparison. Norse sagas tell of Jotun, primordial beings whose strength could move mountains and reshape coastlines. Even relatively recent historical explorers documented encounters with unusually tall human populations. Magellan's chroniclers described meeting tribes in Patagonia whose members towered over European sailors. John Smith's accounts from North America mention indigenous peoples of exceptional height. Antonio de Herrera y Tordesillas recorded similar observations throughout the Americas. While skeptics dismiss these reports as exaggerations or cultural misunderstandings, the consistency of such accounts across different time periods and geographical regions suggests something more significant than coincidental storytelling. The emerging pattern transcends simple mythology, forbidden interbreeding between species, hybrid offspring with superhuman capabilities, global catastrophic flooding, and post-disaster civilizations that possessed advanced knowledge they seemingly shouldn't have developed independently. This narrative framework appears in every major cultural tradition across the planet. Mainstream academia insists the Great Pyramid of Giza represents nothing more than an elaborate burial chamber for an ancient pharaoh. Yet beneath this official narrative lies a far more intriguing possibility, one that connects directly to the suppressed testimonies we've been examining. Medieval Arab historians like al-Makrizi preserved traditions claiming that the pyramids weren't originally Egyptian constructions at all. According to these accounts, they were built by Hermia, the Arabic name for Enoch, who foresaw the coming deluge and created these massive stone repositories to preserve crucial knowledge from destruction. These weren't tombs, but libraries designed to survive planetary catastrophe. This connection between Enoch and pyramid construction isn't merely medieval speculation. The precision of the Great Pyramid's astronomical alignments demonstrates knowledge of celestial mechanics that supposedly didn't exist in ancient Egypt. Its orientation matches stellar positions with mathematical accuracy that requires understanding of precession cycles spanning thousands of years. Consider the impossibility. How did Bronze Age builders achieve engineering tolerances that challenge modern construction capabilities? The pyramid's base forms a perfect square measuring 755 feet on each side, with variance of less than 2 inches. Its height originally measured exactly 481 feet, creating proportional relationships that encode advanced mathematical constants like pi and the golden ratio. But the most compelling evidence lies in what these structures were designed to preserve. Deep within the pyramid complex, chambers contain hieroglyphic texts, describing knowledge that predates Egyptian civilization itself. The pyramid texts speak of beings who came from the stars, of technologies beyond human understanding, of wisdom preserved from previous world ages. Egyptian mythology describes a foundational period called Zep Tepi Nath, the first time, when divine beings ruled directly on earth. During this golden age, gods walked among humans, establishing the principles of civilization, architecture, writing, and cosmic science. But this harmony couldn't last forever. According to these ancient accounts, corruption eventually contaminated the divine order, triggering a punishment that swept across the earth in the form of catastrophic flooding. Yet, knowledge wasn't completely lost. 7 sages survived the deluge, carrying essential wisdom that would rebuild civilization along the Nile River. This pattern of 7 wisdom keepers appears with remarkable consistency across completely separate cultural traditions. Babylonian texts describe 7 Apkallu who preserved knowledge through the flood. Hindu scriptures mention 7 rishis who survived cosmic destruction. The Dogon people of West Africa maintain oral traditions of 7 ancestral teachers who arrived after a great cleansing. These weren't ordinary human survivors. They were described as intermediaries between divine and mortal realms, possessing knowledge that far exceeded normal human capabilities. Their mission involved re-establishing civilization using preserved technologies and spiritual sciences from the pre-flood world. The Egyptian god Thoth epitomizes this role of knowledge keeper and cosmic mediator. Ancient texts describe him possessing miraculous devices that sound like primitive descriptions of advanced technology, mirrors capable of viewing distant locations, mechanical birds that could transmit information across vast distances, emerald tablets inscribed with universal laws governing reality itself. To Greek traditions, this same figure became known as Hermes Trismegistus Nastis Great Hermes. Arabic scholars identified him as Idris, a sage of immense longevity. Many ancient sources suggested that Thoth, Hermes, and Enoch were different cultural names for the same individual, Messiah being who transcended normal human limitations and was eventually taken directly into heavenly realms without experiencing death. If these accounts describe the same person, it implies that multiple civilizations preserved memories of an individual who bridged the gap between pre-flood and post-flood knowledge systems. This figure served as a living link to technologies and wisdom that would otherwise have been completely lost. The parallels extend far beyond Egyptian traditions. Greek mythology describes the Titans, primordial beings who ruled before the current order of gods. These Titans were eventually overthrown in a cosmic war called the Titanomachy and imprisoned beneath the earth. Yet their hybrid offspring remained demigods, heroes, and giants who shaped human civilization through their extraordinary abilities. Hesiod's writings describe an age of semi-divine humans who possessed strength and nobility far exceeding later generations. These beings served as intermediaries between immortal gods and mortal humans, exactly matching the role described for the Nephilim in the Book of Enoch. Irish mythology preserves similar memories through stories of the Fomorians, monstrous giants who ruled Ireland before being driven into the sea by later divine arrivals. These weren't entirely evil beings, but rather representatives of chaotic primordial forces that needed to be contained for civilization to flourish. Norse traditions tell of Jotun Mars frost giants who existed before the current cosmic order. According to these myths, the blood of slain giants formed the rivers and seas of the present world. Their defeat was necessary for the establishment of Midgard, the realm of human habitation. In every case, these traditions describe powerful beings who predated current human civilization, possessed capabilities far beyond normal human limitations, and were eventually defeated or contained through divine intervention. The consistency of this narrative framework across geographically isolated cultures suggests shared historical memory rather than coincidental mythological invention. Archaeological discoveries occasionally provide tantalizing glimpses that support these ancient accounts. In 1881, Egyptian excavations near the Nile uncovered skeletal remains measuring over 7 feet in length, with skull capacities significantly larger than normal human proportions. These findings were quietly catalogued and stored away, rarely mentioned in official archaeological reports. Similar discoveries surface periodically around the world before disappearing into private collections or government storage facilities. Photographs of giant skeletons occasionally appear in newspapers from the early 20th century, showing remains that dwarf normal human proportions. Yet these artifacts somehow vanish from public view, dismissed as hoaxes or misidentifications by academic authorities. The pattern of suppression raises uncomfortable questions. If these remains represent nothing more than normal human variation or archaeological mistakes, why the consistent effort to remove them from public awareness? What institutional interests are served by maintaining that human beings have always existed within current physical parameters? The global distribution of giant legends extends far beyond European and Middle Eastern traditions. In Mesoamerica, both Maya and Aztec cultures preserve detailed accounts of giants who constructed massive cities before being destroyed by floods and cosmic fires. These weren't vague mythological references, but specific historical claims about previous inhabitants who possessed advanced architectural knowledge. South American traditions describe Viracocha, a godlike figure who brought civilization to the Andes region following a great deluge. According to these accounts, Viracocha was accompanied by giant beings who helped establish the foundations of Andean culture before mysteriously departing. Even in remote Polynesia, traditional chants describe powerful beings who came from the stars, mated with human women, and produced dynasties of exceptionally capable rulers. These stories emerge from cultures that had no contact with Middle Eastern or European mythological traditions, yet they preserve virtually identical narrative elements. The global consistency of these accounts challenges conventional explanations of independent mythological development. Either human imagination is remarkably uniform across all cultures and time periods, or these traditions preserve fragmented memories of actual historical events that affected the entire planet. Modern scientific discoveries add unexpected support to some aspects of these ancient claims. Geneticists have identified mysterious DNA sequences in modern human populations that don't match any known evolutionary pathway. These genetic anomalies suggest periods of rapid genetic change that don't fit gradual evolutionary models. Astronomers have documented evidence of cosmic impacts and dramatic climate changes that occurred precisely during the time periods associated with flood myths. Geological surveys confirm massive flooding events that would have devastated coastal civilizations worldwide, approximately 10,000–12,000 years ago. The convergence of mythological, archaeological, genetic, and geological evidence creates a compelling case that human prehistory included events and encounters that have been systematically erased from official historical narratives. The Book of Enoch and related texts may represent authentic testimony from witnesses to these suppressed chapters of human experience. As we continue deeper into this investigation, the evidence becomes increasingly difficult to dismiss as mere coincidence or cultural fantasy. Something extraordinary happened in humanity's distant past, something so significant that echoes of it survived in every corner of human memory, despite centuries of official suppression and scholarly skepticism. The testimonies of giant beings stretch far beyond ancient Middle Eastern manuscripts, appearing with startling consistency across every continent and culture on Earth. These aren't isolated legends confined to biblical or Mesopotamian texts. They represent a global phenomenon that transcends geographical boundaries and cultural barriers. In Ireland, the massive hexagonal basalt columns forming the Giant's Causeway have been attributed for centuries to Finn mac Cool, a legendary giant who supposedly constructed this natural bridge to Scotland for combat with another giant named Benandana. While modern geology explains these formations through volcanic activity, local traditions insisted these were the architectural achievements of beings possessing superhuman strength and engineering capabilities. Norse sagas describe the Jotun as primordial giants locked in eternal conflict with the gods. These weren't merely large humans, but cosmic forces whose battles literally shaped the physical landscape of the world. According to these traditions, mountains were formed from giant corpses, rivers flowed with their blood, and their defeat was necessary for establishing the current world order suitable for human habitation. Celtic mythology preserves memories of the Fomorians, sea-born giants who demanded tribute and human sacrifices from early Irish settlers. These beings were described as possessing supernatural powers and monstrous appearances, ruling through terror until they were eventually overthrown by the Tuatha De Danann, themselves described as divine beings with advanced magical abilities. Across the Atlantic Ocean, Native American tribes maintained remarkably similar traditions. The Pawnee spoke of tall, red-haired warriors who inhabited cave systems before mysteriously vanishing from the landscape. These weren't friendly neighbors, but hostile beings who threatened tribal survival through their aggressive territorial expansion and violent behavior. European exploration of the Americas consistently produced accounts of encounters with extraordinarily tall indigenous populations. Magellan's chronicler Antonio Pigafetta documented meetings with Patagonian tribes whose members were so massive that the tallest European sailors barely reached their waistlines. These weren't exaggerated travel tales, designed to impress audiences back home by me. They were detailed observations recorded by multiple expedition members. Spanish conquistadors in Mexico reported being shown enormous femur bones claimed by indigenous peoples to belong to a vanished race of giants who once dominated the region. These artifacts were presented as evidence of previous inhabitants whose physical capabilities far exceeded normal human parameters. The consistency of these global accounts raises profound questions about conventional historical narratives. Either human imagination is remarkably uniform across all cultures, consistently inventing identical stories about giant beings, or these traditions preserve authentic memories of encounters with non-standard human populations that once existed alongside our ancestors. Archaeological evidence continues to surface that challenges comfortable assumptions about human physical limitations throughout history. At Baalbek in Lebanon, the famous Stone of the Pregnant Woman weighs over 1,000 tons and remains partially quarried from the ancient bedrock. Nearby blocks exceed 1,200 tons, requiring engineering capabilities that would challenge even modern heavy lifting equipment. The precision of these megalithic constructions defies conventional explanations of Bronze Age technology, yet local Lebanese traditions have consistently attributed these achievements to giants who possessed strength sufficient to manipulate such massive stones as easily as ordinary humans handle building blocks. In Egypt's Saqqara necropolis, the Serapeum contains dozens of massive granite sarcophagi, each large enough to accommodate beings significantly taller than normal human proportions. These containers sit empty with their lids displaced, as if their original contents were deliberately removed at some point in antiquity. While mainstream archaeology dismisses them as ceremonial artifacts, their enormous scale suggests they were designed for actual occupants of extraordinary size. Modern military encounters have occasionally produced accounts that echo these ancient testimonies. In 2002, reports emerged from Afghanistan describing American soldiers encountering a 12-foot-tall humanoid with fiery red hair and doubled rows of teeth emerging from a mountain cave system. According to these accounts, the entity attacked with a spear, killing one soldier before being neutralized by concentrated gunfire. Official military sources deny these events, yet the stories persist among veterans who claim direct involvement. Whether these represent authentic encounters or military folklore born from combat stress, they demonstrate that giant legends continue to manifest in contemporary contexts, suggesting these narratives retain psychological or cultural significance that transcends ancient historical periods. Throughout the 19th and early 20th centuries, American newspapers regularly reported discoveries of oversized skeletal remains during construction projects and archaeological excavations. These findings typically involved femur bones matching the length of normal adult humans, skulls with cranial capacities far exceeding standard parameters, and complete skeletons suggesting individuals of 8–12 feet in height. Yet these artifacts consistently disappeared from public view after initial reporting. Museum officials would claim the remains were misidentified animal fossils, private collectors would acquire them for undisclosed purposes, or government agencies would confiscate them for further study that never produced published results. The pattern of suppression surrounding giant skeletal discoveries suggests institutional resistance to evidence that challenges established anthropological narratives. If these remains represent nothing more than normal human variation or paleontological misidentifications, why the consistent effort to remove them from public scrutiny? Ancient traditions consistently portray these giant beings not as benevolent guardians or wise mentors, but as violent, destructive entities whose appetites and behaviors threatened human survival. This characterization appears across completely separate cultural contexts, suggesting shared experience rather than coincidental storytelling patterns. The Book of Enoch describes Nephilim as savage creatures who consumed human resources until famine spread, then turned to cannibalism when other food sources were exhausted. Mesopotamian texts portray Anunnaki offspring as beings whose violence disrupted social order. Greek mythology depicts giants as chaotic forces requiring divine intervention to control. This consistent negative portrayal may explain why so many traditions describe the elimination of giants as necessary and merciful rather than tragic. The global flood wasn't merely punishment for human wickedness, but eradication of a dangerous hybrid population that threatened the stability of natural order itself. Yet these narratives don't end with complete destruction. Instead, they pivot toward themes of survival, preservation, and renewal. Every flood tradition includes chosen individuals who receive advance warning and instructions for preserving essential knowledge through the catastrophic transition period. In biblical accounts, Noah builds an ark and establishes a covenant ensuring species survival. Mesopotamian texts describe Utnapishtim receiving immortality as reward for preserving life through the deluge. Greek mythology tells of Deucalion and Pyrrha repopulating the earth by casting stones that transform into human beings. This survival motif appears with remarkable consistency across geographically isolated cultures. Mayan traditions describe the destruction of wooden people by flood, followed by the creation of maize people who carry on human civilization. Hindu scriptures detail various cosmic destructions followed by preservation of essential knowledge through divine intervention. Egyptian mythology presents perhaps the most sophisticated version of this survival narrative. Zep-Tepi represents not only a golden age of divine rule, but a restoration period following cosmic catastrophe. 7 sages emerge from the waters carrying essential wisdom needed to rebuild civilization along the Nile River. These 7 wisdom keepers appear throughout global traditions under various names and cultural contexts. Mesopotamian texts describe 7 Apkallu, who preserve sacred knowledge through the flood. Hindu scriptures mention 7 rishis who transmit the Vedas after cosmic destruction. The Dogon people of West Africa maintain oral traditions of 7 ancestral teachers who arrived after a great cleansing. In South American traditions, Viracocha appears after the waters recede, traveling throughout the Andes region to re-establish human civilization. This figure wasn't an ordinary human survivor, but a divine being possessing advanced knowledge necessary for rebuilding complex societies from catastrophic destruction. The consistency of these post-flood restoration narratives suggests a global pattern of knowledge preservation and cultural reconstruction that transcends local mythological variations. Rather than isolated cultural inventions, these may represent fragmented memories of actual historical processes by which advanced information was transmitted across the flood boundary. Modern geological research confirms that massive flooding events occurred approximately 10,000–12,000 years ago, precisely matching the time frame associated with these mythological accounts. The transition from Paleolithic to Neolithic cultures occurred immediately following this period, marked by the sudden appearance of advanced agricultural, astronomical, and architectural knowledge across multiple continents. This archaeological evidence supports the possibility that pre-flood civilizations possessed sophisticated understanding that was deliberately preserved and redistributed by survivors who understood the approaching catastrophe. The 7 sages, Apkallu, rishis, and similar figures may represent historical individuals who served as bridges between pre-flood and post-flood knowledge systems. The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity. If these accounts preserve authentic historical memory, they suggest that human civilization has experienced cycles of advancement, catastrophic destruction, and carefully orchestrated renewal that challenge linear evolutionary narratives of gradual cultural development. The pattern that emerges across global flood narratives reveals something far more sophisticated than simple survival stories. In every tradition, whether biblical, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, or indigenous, the preservation of civilization depends not on chance survivors, but on carefully chosen individuals who possess advanced knowledge of the coming catastrophe. This selection process isn't random. These chosen preservers consistently share specific characteristics that set them apart from ordinary humans. They possess unusual longevity, extraordinary wisdom, direct communication with divine beings, and most importantly, access to knowledge that shouldn't exist within their historical context. The Dogon people of West Africa provide one of the most compelling examples of this preserved knowledge phenomenon. Their oral traditions describe amphibious beings called the Nomo, who descended from the sky to restore cosmic order after a great destruction. These weren't vague mythological entities, but specific beings who provided detailed astronomical information about the Sirius star system. According to Dogon traditions maintained for thousands of years, Sirius has an invisible companion star that orbits around it in a 50-year cycle. This companion star is incredibly dense, composed of material heavier than anything found on Earth. Modern astronomy only discovered Sirius B in 1862 using advanced telescopes, and didn't confirm its white dwarf composition until the 20th century. How could an isolated African tribe possess accurate knowledge about stellar physics that remained hidden from European science until recently? The Dogon themselves insist this information came directly from the Nommo, who showed them the true nature of the cosmos before departing to their celestial home. This pattern of forbidden knowledge transfer appears throughout post-flood traditions with disturbing consistency. The theme of divine secrets being shared with humanity against cosmic law permeates every major cultural mythology, suggesting these accounts preserve memories of actual knowledge transmission events. In biblical narrative, Adam and Eve consume fruit from the tree of knowledge, instantly gaining awareness of concepts they were never meant to understand. Their punishment involves exile from paradise and the introduction of death into human experience. The Book of Enoch describes watchers teaching humanity metallurgy, writing systems, astronomical calculations, and magical practices, knowledge that elevates human capabilities, while simultaneously corrupting their spiritual nature. Greek mythology presents this same concept through Prometheus, who steals fire from the gods and delivers it to humanity despite divine prohibition. His eternal punishment serves as a warning about the consequences of sharing celestial knowledge with mortal beings. Yet humanity benefits tremendously from this stolen wisdom, advancing rapidly in technological and cultural sophistication. Every culture preserves some version of this narrative. Knowledge arrives suddenly, not through gradual discovery, but as a gift or theft from higher powers. This advancement comes with a price: corruption, punishment, or catastrophic consequences that require divine intervention to resolve. The global flood then serves as both punishment for accepting forbidden knowledge and a reset mechanism designed to limit humanity's access to dangerous information. Yet fragments of this advanced wisdom survive the catastrophe, hidden within megalithic structures, preserved in mythological narratives, and encoded in astronomical alignments that continue to puzzle modern archaeologists. Consider the precision of ancient megalithic construction found worldwide. These aren't primitive achievements, but demonstrations of engineering knowledge that rivals contemporary capabilities. Stone blocks weighing hundreds of tons are fitted together with tolerances measured in millimeters. Structural alignments correspond to celestial mechanics requiring sophisticated understanding of astronomical cycles. Ancient texts describe technologies that sound like science fiction when viewed through primitive cultural contexts: flying vehicles, weapons that harness fire and lightning, communication devices that operate across vast distances, and transportation systems that move massive loads without apparent mechanical force. These descriptions appear consistently across separate civilizations that supposedly had no contact with each other. The survivors who preserved this knowledge aren't depicted as ordinary humans, but as intermediary beings possessing characteristics that distinguish them from normal populations. They demonstrate unusual longevity, supernatural abilities, direct access to divine realms, and most significantly, skin that shimmers with unusual light or luminescence. These physical descriptions appear with remarkable consistency across global traditions. Egyptian texts describe divine beings whose skin radiates golden light. Mesopotamian accounts mention Anunnaki, whose appearance differs markedly from human norms. Native American traditions tell of star people whose bodies glow with celestial radiance. Hindu scriptures describe avatars and rishis, whose physical forms emit divine luminescence. Are these poetic metaphors for spiritual enlightenment, or do they represent attempts to describe beings whose physical composition differed from standard human biology? The consistency of these descriptions across isolated cultures suggests they may preserve authentic observations of entities whose appearance genuinely differed from normal human parameters. Following the flood catastrophe, civilizations didn't gradually rebuild from Stone Age foundations. Instead, they emerged with sophisticated knowledge systems that appeared fully developed from the beginning. Sumerian civilization arose in Mesopotamia, with complete writing systems, advanced mathematics, astronomical knowledge, architectural techniques, legal codes, and urban planning that suggests inheritance from previous advanced cultures rather than independent invention. The Sumerians themselves insisted they received this knowledge directly from the Anunnaki-Menius beings who descended from celestial realms to establish human civilization. These weren't distant gods worshipped from afar, but active participants in human affairs who possessed physical bodies, engaged in personal relationships, and directly influenced historical events. Sumerian tablets provide detailed genealogies of Anunnaki beings, describing their individual personalities, territorial disputes, family relationships, and political conflicts. These accounts read like historical chronicles rather than mythological abstractions, suggesting the Sumerians viewed these entities as real beings they had encountered rather than symbolic representations of natural forces. The tablets describe how the Anunnaki originally came to Earth seeking gold, a substance they required for purposes beyond decorative use. Their mining operations required intensive labor, initially performed by lesser beings called Igigi, who eventually rebelled against their working conditions. This labor revolt created a crisis that threatened Anunnaki operations on Earth. To resolve this workforce shortage, the tablets describe a genetic engineering project designed to create hybrid beings capable of performing required labor while remaining subordinate to Anunnaki authority. These new beings combined Anunnaki genetic material with existing Earth-based biological forms, producing humanity as a purpose-designed species rather than a naturally evolved one. The Sumerian term Adamu refers to this first created human, bearing obvious similarity to the biblical Adam. Both traditions describe the first man being formed from earthly materials but animated by divine essence, resulting in a being that bridges mortal and immortal natures. This creation story appears throughout ancient traditions with variations in detail, but consistency in core concepts. Humanity represents a hybrid species combining terrestrial biology with celestial genetics, explaining both our remarkable capabilities and our fundamental disconnect from purely natural existence. Archaeological evidence from Eridu, identified in Sumerian records as the first city founded by the Anunnaki, reveals construction layers spanning nearly 7,000 years of continuous occupation. The site demonstrates remarkable sophistication from its earliest levels, contradicting expectations of gradual cultural development from primitive beginnings. The Anunnaki themselves are described in Sumerian texts with specific physical characteristics that distinguish them from normal human appearance. They possessed greater height, extended lifespans, enhanced cognitive abilities, and most significantly, the capacity to interbreed with human populations while producing viable offspring. These hybrid children, called Nephilim in Hebrew tradition and various names in other cultures, inherited superhuman characteristics from their Anunnaki parentage. They grew to enormous physical size, possessed supernatural strength, and developed appetites that exceeded normal human parameters. Their presence represented a fundamental disruption of natural order that couldn't be sustained indefinitely. The tablets describe increasing conflict between pure Anunnaki hybrid Nephilim and unmodified human populations. This three-way tension created instability that threatened the entire Earth-based civilization. The decision to eliminate hybrid populations through global flooding represented a cosmic intervention designed to restore balance between the species. Yet knowledge preservation remained essential for post-flood civilization to function. Selected individuals received advance warning and specific instructions for surviving the catastrophe while maintaining access to crucial technological and spiritual information. These chosen preservers served as bridges between pre-flood and post-flood worlds, ensuring continuity of essential knowledge while eliminating dangerous hybrid contamination. The implications of this preserved narrative challenge fundamental assumptions about human origins, development, and our relationship to higher intelligence. Rather than representing the pinnacle of earthly evolution, humanity may be a carefully designed species created to serve purposes we no longer remember, carrying genetic and cultural inheritance from sources we've been taught to dismiss as mythology. The flood represents not just a historical catastrophe, but a deliberate reset of planetary civilization designed to eliminate evidence of this intervention, while preserving enough knowledge to maintain technological and spiritual progress within acceptable parameters. The giants, watchers, and divine beings haven't disappeared. These simply withdrawn behind a veil of myth and legend that conceals their ongoing influence on human affairs. Sumerian descriptions of the Anunnaki reveal beings whose physical characteristics place them definitively outside normal human parameters. Ancient tablets describe entities possessing extraordinary height that dwarfed human populations, skin that radiated luminescent qualities unlike terrestrial biology, and lifespans extending across thousands of years, mice durations that challenge everything we understand about biological aging processes. Archaeological carvings throughout Mesopotamia consistently depict these beings with distinctive features that set them apart from human representations. They appear with wing-like appendages, carry technological devices that seem anachronistic for Bronze Age civilizations, and are frequently shown positioned near what appears to be the Tree of Life, suggesting their role as guardians or distributors of cosmic knowledge. Most intriguingly, many carved reliefs show these beings wearing wrist-mounted objects that bear striking resemblance to modern timepieces or communication devices. These artifacts appear completely out of place within conventional understanding of ancient technological capabilities, yet they're depicted with consistent detail across multiple archaeological sites and time periods. To contemporary observers, these images represent symbolic or religious artwork, but Sumerian texts treat these beings as historical reality, describing them as the literal founders of human kingship and civilization. The famous Sumerian king list begins with rulers whose reigns lasted tens of thousands of years, only shortening to normal human lifespans after the Great Flood event. Mainstream historians dismiss these extended reigns as exaggerated mythology designed to legitimize royal authority. However, when viewed through the lens of preserved ancient memory, these records may document an actual transition period when non-human entities governed human populations directly before withdrawing from active terrestrial involvement. This narrative pattern extends far beyond Mesopotamian civilization, appearing with remarkable consistency across global cultures that supposedly developed independently. Egyptian traditions describe divine dynasties that ruled before the pharaohs established human kingdoms. Hindu scriptures detail conflicts between Devas and Asuryas and celestial beings, whose struggles shaped earthly affairs and whose knowledge was transmitted to mortal recipients. Mesoamerican mythology preserves memories of Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent deity who brought law, learning, and agricultural knowledge to human populations. Each cultural tradition insists that what we recognize as civilization wasn't gradually invented through human trial and error, but was deliberately bestowed by non-human intelligences possessing superior capabilities. The mysterious planet Nibiru adds another layer of complexity to these accounts. Some interpretations of Sumerian text describe this as the homeworld of the Anunnaki, a wandering celestial body with an orbital period of 3,600 years that brings it periodically close to Earth. Whether this represents authentic Sumerian astronomy or modern speculative interpretation remains debatable, but it provides context for understanding Anunnaki motivations and behavior. According to these accounts, Nibiru was originally a verdant habitable world that experienced atmospheric deterioration, forcing its inhabitants to seek essential resources elsewhere. Their need for gold wasn't driven by aesthetic preferences or monetary systems, but by practical technological requirements for atmospheric protection and possibly space travel capabilities. Modern science acknowledges that gold particles possess unique properties for radiation shielding and are utilized in contemporary space technology applications. Could ancient myths preserve technical knowledge that was misunderstood by later scribes who lacked scientific framework for interpreting advanced technological concepts? The departure of the Anunnaki didn't represent complete abandonment of Earth-based operations. Before withdrawing from direct governance, they established human dynasties selected to serve as intermediary rulers, sometimes enhancing chosen bloodlines through genetic integration that would preserve essential capabilities across generations. This concept of divine right to rule sonder lomonashe is imitable to monarchical systems throughout history, may trace directly back to claims that certain families carried genetic inheritance from non-human sources. Sumerian kings served as intermediaries responsible for maintaining communication between celestial and terrestrial realms. Egyptian pharaohs claimed descent from Ra, the sun god. Chinese emperors titled themselves sons of heaven, emphasizing their connection to cosmic authority. This pattern appears universally across human civilizations, suggesting that rulers worldwide echoed the same fundamental claim: political power descended from beyond the human species, rather than emerging through natural social development. When examining ruins of ancient Mesopotamian cities like Uruk, Ur, and Babylon, conventional archaeology views them as remarkable human achievements representing the dawn of civilization. Yet the myths consistently describe these accomplishments as afterglows of older knowledge, parvabad, fragments of advanced understanding that survived the flood catastrophe through careful preservation by Anunnaki survivors and their chosen human representatives. Perhaps this explains why the rise of these civilizations appears so sudden and sophisticated. Rather than witnessing the beginning of human cultural development, we may be observing civilizations reborn from the remnants of something far more advanced that was deliberately concealed or lost through catastrophic events. As Sumerian influence spread throughout the ancient world, their core narratives were adopted and adapted by successor civilizations who modified names and details while preserving essential elements of the original accounts. Babylonian culture inherited these traditions, producing epics that blended historical memory with prophetic warnings about the consequences of overreaching human ambition. The Babylonian creation epic, Enuma Elish, describes gods descending from celestial realms, engaging in complex political conflicts, and leaving humanity to serve as caretakers of Earth under divine supervision. Once again, humans appear not as independent creations, but as byproducts of struggles between superior beings whose agendas extend beyond terrestrial concerns. Babylonian flood narratives, particularly the Atrahasis epic, preserve accounts that predate Genesis yet contain virtually identical details. Divine beings grow weary of human noise and rebellion, sending plagues, famines, and ultimately global flooding to eliminate troublesome populations. One chosen individual receives advance warning from a sympathetic deity, constructs a preservation vessel, and survives to rebuild civilization after the waters recede. The striking similarities between Babylonian and biblical flood accounts raise profound questions about the relationship between these traditions. Rather than simple literary borrowing, both may represent different cultural transmissions of shared historical memory dating back to actual catastrophic events. Babylonian texts also preserve detailed information about the Abkalo-Mia semi-divine sages, often depicted with wings or fish-like garments, who descended from sky or sea to teach humanity essential arts and sciences. 7 in number, these beings appear repeatedly in inscriptions as guardians of sacred knowledge who existed before the flood disaster. Following the deluge, new sages arise to continue the teaching mission, but these post-flood instructors are described as mortal beings whose wisdom, while significant, represents only fragmentary preservation of the complete knowledge systems that existed previously. This pattern of 7 wisdom keepers appears with suspicious consistency across global traditions that supposedly developed independently. Hindu scriptures describe 7 rishis who served as companions to Manu, the flood survivor who helped reshape post-catastrophe civilization. Greek traditions credit 7 wise men with establishing foundations of philosophy and law. Egyptian accounts describe 7 figures who appeared after Zep-Tepi to restore stability and wisdom to the Nile region. The recurring emphasis on 7 specific individuals suggests something more than coincidental mythological development. This may preserve memory of an actual group of survivors who possessed advanced knowledge and were responsible for transmitting essential information across the flood boundary to ensure civilizational continuity. Babylonian records also document Oannes, an extraordinary being described as emerging from the Persian Gulf with human-like intelligence contained within a fish-like body. Daily, this entity would leave aquatic environments to teach humans writing, architecture, and agriculture, returning to the water each evening. The historian Berossus, writing in the 3rd century BCE, recorded that Oannes was the first of several such beings who appeared after the flood to serve as civilizational instructors. While this account sounds fantastical to modern sensibilities, it follows the familiar pattern of non-human teachers arriving suddenly to impart knowledge that exceeds the natural developmental capacity of their recipients. Whether described as possessing feathers, scales, luminescent skin, or other non-human characteristics, these instructors consistently serve identical functions: They are transmission agents for advanced knowledge systems that originate from sources beyond terrestrial human culture. The ruins of Babylon itself serve as testament to both the heights of human achievement and the inevitable decline that follows. The Etemenanke ziggurat, believed to have inspired the biblical Tower of Babel narrative, rose in terraced levels toward the sky as a physical attempt to bridge celestial and terrestrial realms. The biblical account describes this construction project as an act of human pride that angered divine authorities, resulting in language confusion and population scattering as punishment for attempting to exceed proper human limitations. While often interpreted as moral allegory about the dangers of hubris, this story may conceal historical memory of actual human attempts to replicate technologies or structures associated with their non-human predecessors. Once again, the recurring theme emerges: knowledge is granted to humanity, knowledge is misused or exceeds safe parameters, punishment is delivered through catastrophic intervention, and survival is ensured only for selected remnants who can preserve essential elements while accepting imposed limitations. These ancient accounts don't represent primitive mythology or symbolic religious teaching. They may be fragmented historical testimonies describing actual encounters between human populations and non-human intelligences whose technological capabilities and genetic characteristics far exceeded normal terrestrial parameters. The consistency of these narratives across isolated cultures, combined with archaeological anomalies and genetic mysteries that conventional science struggles to explain, suggests that human civilization has been shaped by influences we've been taught to dismiss as fantasy. The Watchers, giants, and divine beings haven't disappeared from our world minds, and they've simply withdrawn behind carefully constructed veils of myth and academic skepticism that discourage serious investigation into humanity's true origins and the continuing presence of non-human intelligence in terrestrial affairs. Within the desolate landscape of ancient Mesopotamian ruins, whispers of forgotten truths continue to resonate through time itself. These archaeological remnants serve as silent testimony to something far more complex than conventional historical narratives suggest. The story of human civilization doesn't follow a simple trajectory of gradual progress, but rather reveals cyclical patterns of extraordinary advancement, catastrophic destruction, and carefully orchestrated rebirth. What mainstream academia presents as the dawn of recorded history may actually represent humanity's emergence from a previous golden age, a renaissance following planetary catastrophe that preserved only fragments of technologies and wisdom systems too sophisticated for Bronze Age cultures to have developed independently. The compelling possibility emerges that the Watchers described in Enoch's testimony, the Anunnaki of Sumerian tablets, the Apkallo of Babylonian records, and Oannes of Persian Gulf traditions, all represent different cultural interpretations of the same non-human intelligence that once maintained direct contact with human populations throughout the ancient world. These beings didn't exist as mythological abstractions or symbolic representations of natural forces. They were physical entities whose advanced capabilities, extended lifespans, and genetic compatibility with humans fundamentally altered the trajectory of terrestrial civilization. Their withdrawal from active involvement in human affairs created the void filled by myth, legend, and deliberately obscured historical memory. To comprehend the full scope of this suppressed narrative, we must examine how deeply these suppressed accounts penetrated the foundational texts and mythological frameworks that shaped entire civilizations across multiple continents and millennia. Hebrew scriptural tradition preserves tantalizing fragments of this larger cosmological framework, even within canonical texts that officially reject the more detailed accounts found in apocryphal sources. Genesis contains the enigmatic verse, "There were giants in the earth in those days, and also after that, when the sons of God came in unto the daughters of men, and they bare children to them." This brief passage opens doorways into an entire hidden cosmology that biblical editors apparently chose to minimize rather than explore fully. The decision to exclude the Book of Enoch from official biblical canon represents one of history's most significant acts of information suppression, eliminating detailed eyewitness accounts of encounters between human and non-human intelligences. Early Christian communities, including influential church fathers like Clement of Alexandria and Tertullian, regularly quoted Enochian texts as authentic scripture. These writings were read in synagogues, copied by scribes, and revered as sacred testimony. Yet by the 4th century CE, they had mysteriously vanished from most Christian traditions, surviving only within Ethiopian Orthodox preservation efforts. This systematic removal wasn't driven by concerns about historical accuracy or literary quality. The Book of Enoch was eliminated because it presented a vision of cosmic reality that conflicted with simplified theological frameworks that later religious institutions sought to establish and maintain. Enochian accounts describe angels not as pure, obedient messengers of divine will, but as complex beings capable of independent decision-making, including choices that violated cosmic law and produced catastrophic consequences. This portrayal challenged hierarchical religious structures that required absolute divine authority and unquestioning human submission. By eliminating the Nephilim watchers and detailed accounts of knowledge transmission from celestial sources, religious authorities created narratives that left humanity alone in the universe, shaped only by divine will and independent human effort. This theological simplification may have served institutional needs for control and authority, but it also erased crucial information about humanity's true origins and ongoing cosmic relationships. Despite official suppression efforts, fragments of Enochian imagery persistently appear throughout canonical scriptures. Genesis flood narratives still describe catastrophic cleansing of global corruption. Christian traditions of angelic rebellion led by Lucifer directly echo earlier accounts of watchers who violated their cosmic responsibilities. Biblical descriptions of giants defeated by Israelite armies mirror Nephilim, who once dominated the earth through superior size and strength. Even more compelling, virtually identical narrative frameworks appear throughout completely separate cultural traditions that supposedly developed independently of Middle Eastern influence. Greek mythology describes Zeus waging cosmic war against Titans, primordial beings born from the union of heaven and earth, whose power proved too dangerous for cosmic stability. These Titans were imprisoned in Tartarus, an underground prison realm, exactly matching Enochian descriptions of fallen watchers bound in subterranean chambers until final judgment. Irish traditions tell of Tuatha Dé Danann fighting monstrous Fomorians, ultimately driving them into the sea just as floodwaters swept away the Nephilim. Norse mythology describes Odin and his divine companions slaying the primordial giant Ymir, whose blood floods the entire world from which new cosmic order emerges. The consistency of this pattern, rebellion by hybrid beings, catastrophic flooding, and establishment of new world order, transcends coincidental mythological development. It suggests shared historical memory preserved across cultures that experienced identical traumatic events. Even in the Americas, where contact with Eurasian civilizations occurred thousands of years later, these same narrative elements appear with remarkable fidelity. Maya and Aztec traditions describe races of giants who constructed massive cities before being destroyed through divine intervention. Peruvian Inca accounts tell of Viracocha first creating giants, then destroying them with floodwaters when their violence became intolerable. These global parallels indicate that humanity collectively preserved memories of actual historical events that affected the entire planet, rather than isolated regional experiences that were transformed into local mythology. The persistence of giant legends across every continent suggests something more profound than cultural imagination. Archaeological discoveries continue to surface that support these ancient testimonies: oversized skeletal remains, megalithic constructions requiring impossible engineering capabilities, and artifacts that seem technologically anachronistic for their supposed time periods. Yet these discoveries consistently disappear from public awareness through systematic suppression efforts that mirror the elimination of Enochian texts from religious canon. Physical evidence that challenges conventional anthropological narratives is dismissed, discredited, or physically removed from accessibility, maintaining official histories that deny humanity's complex prehistoric relationships with non-human intelligences. The Book of Enoch hints at an even more disturbing possibility. Complete elimination of giant populations may not have been achieved through the flood catastrophe. Enochian texts suggest that while physical bodies perished, the spirits of Nephilim continued to exist as disembodied entities that plague humanity as demonic influences. Other traditions describe survivors who escaped destruction by retreating into remote geographical areas, mountain regions, underground caverns, oceanic islands, or polar territories where they continue to exist in diminished numbers but retain their supernatural capabilities. Genesis describes Israelite spies encountering Anakim in Canaan, descendants of giants, who somehow survived the global flood and continued to inhabit the Promised Land. These weren't mythological references, but historical accounts of military encounters with beings whose physical size and strength exceeded normal human parameters. Global folklore preserves consistent accounts of hidden races dwelling apart from mainstream human civilization, while occasionally intruding into populated areas. Irish traditions speak of Fomorians inhabiting remote islands. Norse sagas describe Jotun in frozen wastelands. Greek mythology places titans in underground imprisonment. Even contemporary folklore whispers about Bigfoot, Yeti, or other cryptid beings haunting the margins of civilized territory. Could these represent distorted cultural memories of actual survivor populations that were driven into hiding following the catastrophic flood but never completely eliminated? If so, the flood represents not just divine judgment, but a transitional threshold between two distinct phases of terrestrial history. On one side of this threshold existed a world where non-human beings maintained open contact with human populations, their hybrid offspring ruled as kings and heroes, and advanced technologies were freely shared between species. On the other side emerged our current reality, a world where such beings became legendary, their remnants hidden, and their influence reduced to subtle manipulation through myth, religion, and cultural programming. Humanity inherited an Earth shaped by previous inhabitants whose capabilities far exceeded our current understanding, but we were deliberately isolated from direct contact with these entities and systematically taught to dismiss evidence of their continuing presence as fantasy or delusion. The figure of Enoch himself represents the ultimate bridge between these two worlds. Unlike other biblical patriarchs remembered for military conquests or dynastic achievements, Enoch is distinguished by his unique ability to traverse dimensional boundaries between terrestrial and celestial realms. Genesis provides only cryptic reference, and Enoch walked with God and he was not, for God took him. This brief mention hints at extraordinary circumstances surrounding Enoch's departure from normal human existence, but the full account requires examination of suppressed apocryphal sources. Within the complete Book of Enoch, this patriarch becomes the central figure in an extraordinary cosmic drama involving journeys through multiple heavenly dimensions, detailed observation of universal mechanisms, and direct communication with angelic beings responsible for maintaining celestial order. Enochian accounts describe guided tours through crystalline palaces, across rivers of liquid light, and past cosmic machinery that governs stellar movements, weather patterns, and geological processes. These descriptions read more like reports of advanced technological facilities than poetic spiritual allegories. The striking parallels between Enoch and other ancient figures suggest these may represent different cultural names for the same individual who transcended normal human limitations. Egyptian Thoth mastered celestial measurements and served as keeper of cosmic wisdom. Greek Hermes functioned as messenger between divine and mortal realms. Arabic traditions describe Idris as a sage lifted bodily into heavenly regions where his knowledge was preserved for future transmission. If these represent the same person, it implies that multiple civilizations maintained contact with an individual who possessed extraordinary longevity, technological knowledge, and the ability to communicate directly with non-human intelligences. This figure served as a living repository of pre-flood wisdom, who was eventually removed from terrestrial existence to prevent complete loss of essential information. The implications extend far beyond academic curiosity. If these suppressed accounts preserve authentic historical testimony rather than mythological fantasy, they suggest that human civilization exists within a complex cosmic framework involving multiple intelligent species, advanced technologies that have been deliberately concealed, and ongoing manipulation by entities whose capabilities far exceed our publicly acknowledged understanding. The Watchers, giants, and divine beings haven't disappeared from our reality. They've simply withdrawn behind carefully constructed veils of myth, academic skepticism, and institutional denial that discourage serious investigation into humanity's true origins and the continuing presence of non-human intelligence in terrestrial affairs. These ancient voices whisper across millennia, preserving fragments of knowledge too dangerous to be stated openly, yet too important to be completely forgotten. They remind us that the world we think we know represents only a carefully edited version of a far stranger, a more wondrous reality that continues to unfold around us, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those willing to look beyond the comfortable lies we've been taught to accept as absolute truth. Modern scholarship has long acknowledged the striking similarities between Enoch, Thoth, Hermes, and Idris across separate cultural traditions, yet academic convention treats these as coincidental parallels rather than evidence of shared historical origin. What if conventional interpretation has fundamentally misunderstood these connections? What if these seemingly separate figures represent different cultural preservations of the same extraordinary individual who transcended normal human limitations and maintained direct contact with non-human intelligences? Enoch's role as intermediary between humanity and the Watchers positions him as perhaps the most crucial figure in this entire suppressed narrative. When celestial beings descended to Mount Hermon, they swore binding oaths that committed them to sharing forbidden knowledge with human populations. Through these teachings, humanity gained access to metallurgy, astronomical sciences, enchantment practices, and military technologies that accelerated cultural development far beyond natural evolutionary timelines. But this knowledge transfer came with catastrophic consequences. Advanced information was twisted into instruments of violence and corruption that disrupted cosmic order itself. When divine authorities recognized the threat posed by this contamination, they commissioned Enoch to serve as diplomatic messenger, pleading with higher powers for mercy on behalf of the fallen Watchers. His intercession ultimately failed. Divine judgment was irreversible. The Watchers would be bound in subterranean darkness, their Nephilim offspring eliminated through global flooding, and the corrupted world cleansed through catastrophic destruction. Yet Enoch himself was preserved, not through physical survival of the flood, but through direct translation into celestial realms, where his testimony could be maintained for future transmission. Without Enoch's preserved testimony, all memory of these extraordinary events might have vanished completely from human consciousness. His writings provide the crucial link connecting pre-flood and post-flood civilizations, explaining how advanced knowledge survived planetary catastrophe to resurface in subsequent cultures. This explains why later religious authorities systematically suppressed Enochian texts. Acknowledging these accounts requires admitting that conventional historical narratives represent only partial truth. It means accepting that humanity's origins involve complex relationships with non-human intelligences, whose existence challenges fundamental assumptions about the nature of reality itself. More disturbingly, it suggests that human technological and scientific achievements weren't gradually discovered through independent research and experimentation, but were abruptly transmitted by external sources and then violently withdrawn when the consequences proved uncontrollable. Such revelations would completely destabilize linear progress narratives that form the foundation of modern historical understanding. Restoring Enochian accounts to their proper historical significance inevitably reintroduces profound uncertainty into human origin stories. Yet this uncertainty may be precisely what makes these testimonies so compelling and necessary for understanding our true cosmic situation. The image of Enoch being taken alive into heavenly realms represents preservation rather than destruction. It suggests that humanity, or at least selected portions of it, was considered valuable enough to warrant salvation. Not merely through Noah's physical survival of the flood catastrophe, but through Enoch's preservation of essential knowledge that would otherwise have been completely lost. Enoch functions as a symbol of continuity, bridging the age of direct divine-human interaction with our current era of apparent isolation from non-human intelligence. He carries fragments of cosmic wisdom across the catastrophic divide, ensuring that essential information remains accessible to future generations capable of understanding its significance. This preservation motif ripples throughout global traditions with remarkable consistency. Hindu literature describes Vyasa dictating the Vedas, divine knowledge preserved through human memory systems. Mesoamerican mythology tells of Quetzalcoatl disappearing across oceanic waters while promising to return with restored wisdom. Celtic traditions describe Merlin vanishing into forest realms, neither dead nor alive, his knowledge stored until humanity requires it again. These narratives consistently feature sage figures who transcend normal mortality, lingering at the edge of collective memory as promises that lost wisdom might eventually return to human accessibility. Enoch represents not just a character in forgotten texts, but a cipher for something far more significant, a reminder that human history contains multiple layers of suppressed information. This suggests that wisdom has been gained and lost repeatedly throughout human experience, and that behind myths of angels, gods, and sages lies fundamental truth. Earth once hosted far more than humanity alone. When we observe the night sky with its precisely turning constellations, the same stars Enoch described, the same celestial patterns Sumerians charted, the same heavens that guided Egyptian priests and Babylonian astronomers, or we feel the weight of cosmic continuity, as if the universe itself maintains faith with memories humanity has systematically forgotten. Enoch's testimony reminds us that history follows cyclical rather than linear patterns. Behind each apparent beginning lies another origin hidden in shadow, waiting for rediscovery by those willing to look beyond comfortable conventional narratives. If Enoch represents continuity across cosmic transitions, then the flood represents fracture minus, but what emerged on the other side of this catastrophic boundary reveals patterns that challenge every assumption about primitive post-flood humanity. When floodwaters receded, human populations didn't simply return to wandering tribal existence. Instead, across multiple continents, we witnessed sudden flowering of sophisticated civilizations, as if preserved seeds had been planted in fertile soil by survivors who understood exactly what needed to be rebuilt. This remarkable Renaissance period, dated archaeologically to approximately 10,000–12,000 years ago, saw the emergence of monumental architectural complexes aligned with stellar observations, suggesting that post-flood survivors possessed astronomical knowledge far exceeding what primitive cultures should have been capable of developing independently. Göbekli Tepe in modern Turkey provides perhaps the most dramatic example of this anomalous post-flood sophistication. Buried for millennia and only uncovered in the 1990s, this site contains massive stone circles with carved pillars adorned with complex animal symbolism and abstract designs. Archaeological dating places its construction at nearly 12,000 years ago, thousands of years before the pyramids, before Mesopotamian city-states, before written language supposedly existed. Official interpretation attributes Göbekli Tepe to hunter-gatherer populations just emerging from Ice Age conditions. Yet the complexity of its design, precision of its carvings, and scale of its construction seem far beyond capabilities that such societies possessed according to conventional anthropological models. Who provided the necessary knowledge for such sophisticated construction? Why were the stones precisely aligned with celestial events, demonstrating astronomical understanding that supposedly didn't exist in primitive post-glacial cultures? The mystery deepens when we examine what happened after centuries of use. Göbekli Tepe was deliberately buried, as if its builders intended to hide it from future discovery. Was this ritual closure or an attempt to preserve something essential from approaching disaster? The site remains an unsolved riddle standing at the threshold between prehistoric and historic periods, challenging fundamental assumptions about human developmental timelines. Similar anomalies appear throughout South America. At Pumapunku in Bolivia, massive stone blocks lie scattered across the landscape, carved with precision suggesting tools more advanced than primitive hammer and chisel techniques. Some blocks fit together with joints so exact that paper cannot slip between them, despite being cut from stone harder than granite using supposedly Bronze Age technology. Local indigenous traditions attribute these constructions to Viracocha Misht, a divine figure described as tall, bearded, and cloaked in white, who appeared after great flooding to teach architectural arts and legal systems before vanishing across oceanic waters. Could Viracocha represent another cultural name for the same preservation agents described as Apakalu in Mesopotamian texts or Watchers in Enochian accounts? Egyptian monumental architecture demonstrates equally abrupt sophistication. The step pyramid of Djoser, designed by the enigmatic figure Imhotep, appears seemingly without precedent, suddenly elevating stone construction to levels of mastery that astound contemporary engineers. Within mere centuries, the Great Pyramid was constructed with cardinal alignments and celestial correspondences, so precise that modern technology struggles to replicate the achievement. Traditional accounts attribute these accomplishments to agricultural populations using copper tools and wooden sledges. But preserved Egyptian traditions tell different stories, describing pyramids not as burial chambers, but as repositories of wisdom built to preserve knowledge from Zep Tepi. the first time when divine beings walked directly among human populations. The consistent recurrence of flood myths followed by sudden architectural brilliance cannot be dismissed as coincidental cultural development. Throughout Mesopotamia, ziggurat temples rise toward heavenly realms, echoing Tower of Babel narratives as if attempting to reconnect with cosmic sources that were lost. Ancient Indian texts describe Vimana's flying palaces and advanced warfare machines that existed in forgotten ages before Manu's flood. Mesoamerican Olmec civilization emerges without apparent precedent, carving colossal heads that gaze outward with enigmatic expressions, their scale suggesting memories of rulers who exceeded normal human proportions. Everywhere archaeological investigation extends, identical patterns emerge: catastrophic destruction, carefully planned survival, Renaissance rebirth, and sudden appearance of knowledge systems that exceed expected developmental capabilities. This global consistency suggests that what conventional scholarship dismisses as mythology may actually preserve encoded memories of earlier civilizations that possess technological understanding we cannot yet imagine. If these interpretations prove accurate, the flood represents far more than divine punishment. It functioned as a deliberate reset mechanism, erasing not only problematic populations, but most evidence of their advanced achievements. Only scattered fragments survived, ruins buried beneath sediment layers, myths preserved in oral traditions, and knowledge systems encoded within symbols and stories until humanity developed sufficient maturity to rediscover and properly utilize this information. The implications prove genuinely unsettling for anyone attached to conventional historical narratives. If advanced pre-flood civilizations actually existed, if the flood deliberately erased evidence of their accomplishments, and if selected survivors possessed responsibility for carefully rebuilding human society using preserved wisdom, then everything we've been taught about human origins, development, and our cosmic situation requires fundamental revision. We may not be the first intelligent civilization to inhabit this planet. We may not have developed independently through gradual evolutionary processes. We may be inheritors of a carefully orchestrated restoration project designed to rebuild human civilization while maintaining strict limitations on access to the most dangerous technologies that caused previous catastrophic failures. The Watchers, giants, and divine beings described in suppressed ancient texts haven't disappeared from our reality. They continue to operate behind veils of myth, academic skepticism, and institutional denial that discourage serious investigation into humanity's true origins and ongoing cosmic relationships. These ancient voices whisper across millennia, preserving fragments of essential truth too dangerous to state openly yet too crucial to forget completely. They remind us that the comfortable world we think we inhabit represents only a carefully edited version of far stranger and more wondrous reality that continues to unfold around us, hidden in plain sight, waiting for those courageous enough to look beyond the lies we've been conditioned to accept as absolute truth. The testimony is preserved, the evidence remains scattered but recoverable. The choice belongs to each individual: continue accepting convenient deceptions, or begin the difficult journey toward understanding humanity's authentic cosmic heritage and current situation within a reality far more complex and mysterious than any institution dares to acknowledge publicly. What emerges from this extensive investigation isn't merely ancient mythology or religious allegory, but evidence of a profound truth that challenges everything we've been taught about human civilization's trajectory. History doesn't follow the comfortable linear progression from primitive beginnings to modern sophistication that conventional academia promotes. Instead, it reveals cyclical patterns of extraordinary advancement, catastrophic destruction, and carefully orchestrated renaissance that have repeated multiple times throughout Earth's inhabited periods. The flood described in global traditions represents far more than a single catastrophic event. It functions as a cosmic reset mechanism, a deliberate dividing line between one complete civilizational cycle and the next, creating permanent scars across human collective memory that we still carry within mythological narratives and megalithic stone monuments scattered across every continent. This realization forces us to confront a haunting question that cuts to the heart of human existence itself. If our current technological civilization were to collapse tomorrow, meters drowned by rising seas, incinerated by nuclear warfare, or devastated by cosmic catastrophe, What fragments would survive for the next cycle of human development to discover and interpret? Would future archaeologists examine our skyscrapers, satellite networks, and shattered urban centers and classify them as works of gods or giants? Would they remember our technological achievements as divine interventions, just as we've been taught to dismiss ancient accounts of advanced pre-flood civilizations as primitive mythology? Would our scientific knowledge be transformed into religious doctrine, our historical records become sacred texts, and our leaders elevated to divine status in future cultural memory? The megalithic monuments at Göbekli Tepe, Puma Punku, and Giza may represent exactly these kinds of survival fragments from previous civilizational cycles, physical anchors designed to preserve essential knowledge through catastrophic transitions. The recurring global myths of post-flood sages and teachers represent the human threads that connect these stone repositories across temporal boundaries. Throughout every culture on Earth, identical narratives insist that humanity wasn't abandoned to rebuild in ignorance following catastrophic destruction. Mysterious teachers arrive to provide guidance, and sometimes described as gods, sometimes as exceptional humans, sometimes as beings that transcended normal categorical boundaries. Their arrival patterns remain consistently sudden, their wisdom consistently vast, and their eventual departure consistently enigmatic. Babylonian traditions describe the Apkallu Nia 7 sages depicted with wings or fish-like garments who emerged from oceanic depths to teach fundamental civilizational skills. Indian scriptures preserve accounts of 7 rishis who guided post-flood populations while maintaining sacred knowledge through Manu's deluge. Egyptian mythology describes Thoth bringing writing systems and legal frameworks to populations emerging from cosmic chaos. Greek traditions credit 7 specific sages with establishing philosophical and governmental foundations that became the bedrock of classical civilization. The recurring emphasis on 7 wisdom keepers across geographically isolated cultures suggests shared memory of actual historical preservation protocols, rather than coincidental mythological invention. Why does this specific number appear so consistently? Why do these teaching missions always follow flood or collapse scenarios? The parallels strongly suggest fragmented preservation of unified historical memory, rather than independent cultural development. The Dogon people of Mali preserve perhaps the most compelling account of these post-catastrophe teachers. Their oral traditions describe the Nomo amphibious beings who descended from sky realms in vessels that spun and roared with fire-like energy. These entities taught agricultural techniques, weaving methods, and astronomical knowledge that included detailed information about Sirius, the brightest star visible from Earth. Most remarkably, Dogon traditions describe not only Sirius itself, but an invisible companion star orbiting around it in complex patterns that weren't confirmed by Western astronomy until the 19th century, using advanced telescopic technology. How could an isolated African population possess accurate knowledge about stellar physics that remained hidden from European science for centuries? The Dogon themselves consistently maintain that this information was directly transmitted by the Nomo Mita, the same category of non-human teachers that appear throughout global post-flood traditions under various cultural names and descriptions. Mesoamerican traditions describe Quetzalcoatl, the feathered serpent deity, arriving after catastrophic destruction to teach agricultural arts, legal systems, and astronomical sciences. This figure is consistently portrayed as simultaneously human and divine, eventually departing across oceanic waters while promising future return. The parallels to South American Viracocha are unmistakable. Another tall, bearded figure who appears following flood catastrophe imparts essential knowledge and disappears into oceanic realms. Even across the Pacific Ocean, Polynesian traditions preserve memories of divine navigators or godlike teachers emerging from waters to share previously unknown wisdom. Could these represent cultural variations of identical phenomena? Perhaps survivors from lost advanced civilizations who traveled globally in catastrophe aftermath, systematically planting knowledge seeds among scattered tribal populations, or possibly non-human entities descending when humanity was most vulnerable to guide developmental trajectories according to cosmic protocols. Either interpretation supports the disturbing consistency of these accounts. Cultures separated by oceans and millennia, with no possibility of historical contact, all preserve essentially identical narratives. Humanity wasn't left alone during post-catastrophe rebuilding phases. The symbolic objects associated with these wisdom keepers provide additional clues about their true nature. Ancient accounts describe tablets of stone or emerald inscribed with cosmic laws, staffs or rods capable of controlling lightning and thunder, vessels that could fly or emit luminous energy with thunderous sounds. To contemporary populations, these represented miraculous divine interventions. To modern observers, they sound remarkably similar to advanced technological devices described through primitive linguistic frameworks. Just as medieval populations might describe modern aircraft as great metal birds, ancient peoples may have interpreted sophisticated equipment using the only conceptual vocabulary available to them. If this interpretation proves accurate, then mythology preserves not merely cultural memory but distorted descriptions of actual encounters with technologies that exceeded contemporary understanding by thousands of years. Even biblical narratives conform to this pattern. Following the flood, Noah establishes agricultural settlements, constructs urban centers, and implements legal systems. His descendants spread across Earth carrying fragments of pre-flood knowledge. Some traditions suggest Noah received direct instruction from Enoch himself, ensuring that his survival encompassed intellectual as well as physical preservation. He was entrusted with essential information designed to endure through catastrophic transition. This places biblical patriarchs within the same functional category as wisdom keepers found throughout global traditions, guardians of memory serving as knowledge transmission agents between civilizational cycles. What makes this interpretation compelling is the remarkable speed with which sophisticated civilizations re-emerged following the flood period. By 3000 BCE, Mesopotamia, Egypt, the Indus Valley and China all displayed complex social organization, writing systems, monumental architecture, and astronomical knowledge that historians classify as the Neolithic Revolution. Yet revolutions rarely occur so suddenly or so uniformly across vast geographical distances. Could what conventional scholarship labels invention actually represent remembrance, the systematic reactivation of knowledge preserved by post-flood survivors or transmitted by non-human teachers? This interpretation suggests humanity is currently experiencing not its first civilizational story, but perhaps its second, third, or fourth iteration. Each cycle terminates through catastrophic destruction, but complete erasure never occurs. Essential fragments endure through sage preservation, megalithic encoding, and mythological transmission. Each rebuilding phase involves rediscovering inherited knowledge, while never quite comprehending how much of our apparent progress represents authentic innovation versus recovered wisdom from previous cycles. When contemporary humans observe nocturnal skies, we may be viewing the same constellations that ancient teachers used for navigation, education, and prophetic warning. Their voices may be faint now, scattered across languages and cultures, but they converge on fundamental truth. Humanity has been consistently guided, shaped, and possibly even genetically engineered by forces beyond terrestrial origin. The crucial question isn't whether these external influences existed, but rather their true identity and current operational status. If post-flood wisdom keepers functioned as memory guardians, then the megalithic monuments they inspired serve as physical anchors, permanent reminders of truths too essential to entrust solely to linguistic transmission through temporal erosion. These monuments exist throughout every continent, designed for endurance rather than mere aesthetic impression. Their true purpose wasn't demonstrating architectural capabilities, but ensuring survival through floods, warfare, and collective forgetfulness that characterize civilizational transition periods. The Great Pyramid of Giza exemplifies this preservation function. Rising with precision that challenges contemporary engineering capabilities, its foundation aligns with true north to accuracies that modern surveyors struggle to achieve. Rather than serving as burial architecture, it functions more like stone-based technological equipment. Internal chambers and shafts align with specific stellar positions, suggesting astronomical rather than mortuary purposes. The structure appears designed to encode information through geometric relationships rather than linguistic inscriptions. Arab medieval chroniclers attributed its construction not to Pharaoh Khufu's slave labor, but to sages from Zep Tepi who preserved cosmic sciences against approaching deluge. Some accounts specifically name Idris Enoch, as architect, storing within the pyramid essential knowledge of celestial and terrestrial sciences. This interpretation positions the Great Pyramid not as burial monument, but as time capsule containing wisdom from pre-flood civilizations. Similar mysteries appear throughout South America. At Sacsayhuaman above Cusco, massive stone walls demonstrate fitting precision that prevents knife blade insertion between blocks. These irregular interlocking stones, some weighing over 200 tons, appear designed like three-dimensional puzzles, requiring technologies that exceed conventional archaeological explanations. Local traditions consistently attribute these constructions to giants or Viracocha's servants working after flood catastrophe. At Puma Punku, stone blocks display cutting precision and drill holes that resemble contemporary machine tooling rather than primitive hammer and chisel work. These megalithic sites worldwide share common characteristics. They utilize stone blocks of impossible weight requiring advanced transportation methods, demonstrate precision fitting that challenges modern engineering capabilities, incorporate astronomical alignments suggesting sophisticated cosmic knowledge, and appear in regions where local traditions attribute construction to non-human entities or post-flood wisdom keepers. The global distribution and consistent sophistication of these monuments suggests coordinated construction campaigns by entities possessing technological capabilities far exceeding those officially attributed to ancient populations. Rather than representing gradual human architectural development, they may document systematic knowledge preservation efforts designed to survive civilizational collapse and provide guidance for future reconstruction phases. The implications extend far beyond archaeological curiosity. If these interpretations prove accurate, human civilization exists within cosmic frameworks involving multiple intelligent species, technologies deliberately concealed from public awareness, and ongoing manipulation by entities whose capabilities exceed our officially acknowledged understanding. The Watchers, giants, and divine beings described in suppressed ancient texts haven't disappeared from terrestrial operations. They continue functioning behind carefully constructed veils of academic skepticism, institutional denial, and mythological misdirection that discourage serious investigation into humanity's authentic origins and current cosmic relationships. These ancient voices preserve fragments of truth too dangerous for open discussion yet too crucial for complete erasure. They remind us that comfortable reality we think we inhabit represents only carefully edited versions of far stranger and more wondrous cosmic situations that continue unfolding around us. The testimony has been preserved across millennia through stone monuments, mythological narratives, and suppressed historical texts. The evidence remains scattered but recoverable for those willing to look beyond conventional limitations. The choice belongs to each individual. Continue accepting comfortable deceptions promoted by institutional authorities, or begin the challenging journey toward understanding humanity's authentic heritage within reality systems far more complex and mysterious than any official source dares acknowledge publicly. Our current civilization may represent just one iteration in an endless cycle of rise, catastrophe, and carefully orchestrated renewal. The question isn't whether this pattern will continue, but whether we'll recognize our position within it before the next reset arrives. The ancient witnesses have preserved their warnings in stone and story. Whether we choose to listen may determine not just our understanding of the past, but our preparation for the future that may be approaching faster than anyone dares to imagine. The global distribution of impossible megalithic constructions reveals something far more disturbing than conventional archaeology dares acknowledge. These monuments weren't created by primitive populations using bronze tools and manual labor. They represent coordinated preservation efforts by entities possessing technological capabilities that our current civilization has barely begun to understand. Why would cultures supposedly lacking wheel transportation or iron metallurgy achieve engineering feats that challenge contemporary heavy construction equipment? Their own mythological accounts provide consistent answers. The actual builders were beings from before Maya survivors or descendants of pre-flood civilizations whose capabilities exceeded normal human parameters by orders of magnitude. Easter Island's Moai statues exemplify these impossible achievements. Nearly 900 stone figures stare inland with solemn expressions, their backs eternally turned toward oceanic depths. The Rapa Nui people describe these monuments as representing ancestral giants who once walked the island carrying Manamai spiritual force combined with technological knowledge that modern humans can barely comprehend. Some moai exceed 30 feet in height and weigh over 80 tons, carved from volcanic bedrock and transported across miles of difficult terrain using methods that remain hotly contested among archaeological researchers. While some experiments suggest they could have been walked upright using rope systems, this explanation strains credibility when applied to the largest specimens that would require hundreds of coordinated workers operating with impossible precision. More significantly, these moai bear striking resemblance to colossal statues found throughout South America and stylized figures decorating ancient Mesopotamian monuments. Are these similarities mere coincidence, or do they represent evidence of shared architectural legacy transmitted by the same post-flood knowledge keepers who appeared globally to guide civilization's reconstruction? Even beneath oceanic waters, whispers of drowned worlds continue to surface. Off Japan's coast at Yonaguni, divers have discovered massive submerged structures featuring elaborate terraces, steps, and platform complexes that suggest sophisticated urban construction. While some researchers argue these represent natural geological formations, others maintain they constitute ruins of cities that were inundated when sea levels rose following Ice Age glacial melting. If the latter interpretation proves accurate, it implies that technologically advanced societies existed far earlier than conventional timelines acknowledge, those civilizations that were systematically erased when rising waters flooded coastal regions worldwide. Plato's account of Atlantis may preserve authentic historical memory rather than philosophical allegory. His claim that Egyptian priests provided information about a great civilization beyond the Pillars of Hercules, destroyed in a single day and night, gains credibility when viewed alongside global flood traditions and underwater archaeological discoveries. Too many separate cultures preserve memories of lost cities beneath oceanic waves for these accounts to be dismissed as pure mythology. The consistency of these testimonies suggests shared experience of actual catastrophic events that reshaped planetary geography and eliminated entire civilizations from historical record. What unifies these mysterious megalithic sites isn't only their impossible construction methods, but their precise orientation towards specific celestial phenomena. Göbekli Tepe aligns with Sirius rising means, the same star held sacred by Egyptians, and inexplicably known to Dogon astronomical traditions. Stonehenge marks solstice positions that echo temple alignments throughout Egypt and Mesopotamian ziggurats. The Teotihuacan pyramid complex corresponds to Orion's belt constellation, exactly matching Giza pyramid alignments on the opposite side of the planet. Across vast temporal and geographical distances, identical stellar patterns appear repeatedly, suggesting builders followed unified cosmic blueprints rather than developing independent architectural traditions. Did post-flood wisdom keepers preserve not only survival knowledge, but celestial maps designed to ensure humanity would maintain its proper relationship with cosmic order? Skeptical researchers insist these alignments represent statistical coincidence, inevitable results when examining thousands of monuments across millennia. Yet the consistency proves striking when focused on specific constellations. Why does Orion appear repeatedly? Why do Sirius observations transcend cultural boundaries? Why do solstice markers emerge independently across isolated civilizations? To ancient populations, celestial observations represented far more than navigational tools. The sky functioned as permanent memory storage, unchanging reference points connecting terrestrial existence with divine realms. Encoding megalithic monuments with stellar alignments created physical bridges between earthly and heavenly dimensions, while ensuring future generations would remember their cosmic heritage. These monuments weren't merely architectural achievements, but encoded messages declaring, "Look upward, remember your origins, never forget your place within universal order." They remind contemporary humanity that we inherit knowledge systems larger than our current understanding, wisdom transmitted through catastrophic transitions when linguistic preservation proved impossible. Despite our incomplete comprehension of their purposes, these structures' endurance across millennia ensures their essential questions cannot be silenced indefinitely. Who possessed capabilities for such constructions? Why did they prioritize astronomical alignments over purely practical considerations? What truths were they desperate to preserve against future catastrophic erasure? Walking among these ancient ruins produces profound awareness of inheriting something older and more significant than conventional historical narratives acknowledge. Each precisely placed stone block, every shaft of light aligned with stellar positions, whispers that humanity's authentic story extends far deeper into time, while remaining more intricately connected with celestial influences than modern institutional authorities permit us to believe. The wisdom keepers may have departed, the giants may have perished in flooding catastrophe, but their fingerprints remain permanently etched into our planet's geological foundations. If megalithic ruins and monuments represent physical fingerprints of forgotten civilizations, then mythological traditions constitute their preserved voices, testimonies carried across generations through stories that appear fantastical, yet maintain disturbing consistency across all human cultures. The most universal of these narratives describes cosmic warfare between divine forces and giant beings, the supernatural struggles that fundamentally reshape terrestrial conditions while determining humanity's ultimate fate. Every corner of the Earth preserves memories of epochs when entities exceeding normal physical limitations engaged in conflicts, whose consequences continue affecting our current reality. Greek traditions describe the Gigantomachy Nisha, the great battle between Olympian gods and earthborn giants who sought to overthrow divine authority through raw physical power. These titans were ultimately defeated and buried beneath mountain ranges, with volcanic eruptions and seismic activity attributed to their continued struggles for freedom from subterranean imprisonment. Norse mythology tells of endless warfare between Azure deities and Jotun frost giants born from Ymir, the primordial being whose dismembered body became the earth itself. This conflict never achieved final resolution. Ragnarök represents the prophesied ultimate battle that will pit gods and giants in cosmic struggle, determining whether current world order survives or yields to primordial chaos. Hebrew scriptural traditions describe related conflicts in different terms. Nephilim, offspring of fallen watchers, brought violence and corruption until global flooding eliminated them. Yet later biblical accounts describe continued encounters with giant populations, the Anakim, Rephaim, and Zamzumim, whose tribal names appear throughout conquest narratives, suggesting authentic historical memory of military campaigns against unusually large and powerful adversaries. David's confrontation with Goliath represents individual human triumph over gigantic opposition, symbolizing humanity's eventual assertion of dominance in a world previously overshadowed by entities of superhuman capabilities. These aren't purely symbolic narratives, but preserved accounts of actual conflicts between different population types competing for terrestrial control. Even across Atlantic oceanic barriers, identical patterns emerge. Intinge traditions describe giants arriving on South American shores who consumed regional resources until Viracocha destroyed them with heavenly fire. Aztec cosmology describes previous world ages, including periods when giants dominated the earth before being eliminated through catastrophic divine intervention. North American indigenous tribes maintained oral histories of tall, red-haired warriors who inhabited cave systems while engaging in warfare against native populations. Occasionally, unusually large skeletal remains were discovered and displayed as physical evidence supporting these accounts, though most such artifacts subsequently vanished into private collections or institutional storage facilities. The striking consistency of these global traditions lies not merely in their existence but in their uniform characterization of giant beings as sources of upheaval, warfare, and destruction. These entities never appear as benevolent guardians or wise rulers. Instead, they consistently represent forces of appetite and violence whose presence destabilizes natural order to degrees requiring divine intervention for correction. Their elimination is universally portrayed as a necessary precondition for human civilization to flourish peacefully. This consistency strongly suggests these accounts preserve authentic historical memory rather than purely symbolic religious teaching. If giants were merely mythological constructs, surely some cultures would have portrayed them as positive or neutral figures. Instead, virtually all traditions characterize them as dangerous threats requiring removal, yet their destruction consistently generates creation of new world orders. Norse mythology describes Ymir's death as birthing the current cosmos. Greek traditions portray Titan defeat as enabling Zeus's Olympian reign. Hebrew flood narratives describe Nephilim elimination as prerequisite for Noah's covenant establishing renewed human-divine relationship. The consistent pattern suggests these weren't merely allegorical teachings, but preserved memories of transitional periods when larger, older, or more powerful populations were finally removed, leaving Earth exclusively to current human inhabitants. However, mythological accounts also hint that elimination wasn't completely successful. Some giants allegedly survived in hidden locations beneath mountain ranges, within oceanic depths, on remote islands that remain inaccessible to normal human exploration. Contemporary folklore throughout remote regions continues reporting enormous humanoid figures glimpsed in wilderness areas. Whether described as trolls in Scandinavian traditions, ogres in European tales, or Bigfoot in North American accounts, these legends may represent faded echoes of once common memories that giant populations were historically real, and some may have endured in isolated refuges. What if the wars between gods and giants preserved distorted memories of actual conflicts rather than purely mythological narratives? Perhaps these describe battles between different factions of Watchers and their hybrid offspring, cosmic struggles fought using weapons and technologies whose capabilities have been completely lost to contemporary understanding. Ancient texts frequently describe weapons of fire from sky realms, thunder that split mountain ranges and floods unleashed as punishment against rebellious populations. These could represent poetic descriptions of natural phenomena, or they might preserve fragmented recollections of technological warfare, exceeding our current military capabilities by thousands of years. If accurate, humanity may have survived as collateral victims caught between warring factions of beings whose power far exceeded our ancestors' comprehension. Our continued existence resulted not from our own capabilities, but from the collapse of the advanced civilizations whose conflicts devastated the planetary environment they required for survival. Geographical evidence appears to support these possibilities. Mediterranean islands bear names directly connected to divine giant battles. Andean mountain ranges are traditionally described as petrified remains of ancient beings. North American burial mounds continue yielding oversized skeletal remains whose origins remain officially unexplained. Everywhere, local geography interweaves with mythological accounts, as if the Earth itself served as battlefield where these cosmic conflicts once raged. Considering this possibility transforms mythology from pure imagination into distorted historical record misaccounts, transmitted orally until memory blurred into symbolism, but preserving essential information about actual events. The battles between gods and giants may not have occurred exactly as traditional narratives describe, but something resembling these conflicts likely did occur. Our planet may represent the inherited remains of a world where beings of immense size and technological capability were ultimately defeated, leaving humanity to rebuild civilization from their scattered remnants. We find ourselves heirs not only to wisdom preserved by post-flood sages, but also to ruins left by warfare that fundamentally shaped pre-flood terrestrial conditions. The giants may have perished, but their shadows continue influencing human development through stories, stone monuments, and perhaps through physical evidence still buried beneath our feet. This cosmic warfare backdrop naturally raises crucial questions about the knowledge systems that motivated these conflicts. What information was considered so valuable that different factions of superhuman beings would wage devastating wars to control its distribution? Why did these knowledge transfers prove so dangerous that divine authorities felt compelled to eliminate entire hybrid populations to prevent further contamination? The Book of Enoch suggests that when Watchers descended to Earth, they violated cosmic law not only through forbidden reproductive relationships, but through sharing classified information with human populations. Azazel taught metallurgical techniques for creating advanced weapons and armor. Other fallen angels provided instruction in cosmetics, enchantments, astronomical calculations, and sophisticated metalworking processes. These knowledge transfers elevated human capabilities rapidly, but simultaneously corrupted spiritual development by introducing vanity, violence, and magical practices that disrupted natural evolutionary processes. The testimony presents knowledge as fundamentally double-edged, capable of elevating consciousness and technological capability, but equally capable of destroying the recipients if transmitted prematurely or without proper spiritual preparation. This narrative framework mirrors countless mythological traditions worldwide where forbidden knowledge is given or stolen with catastrophic consequences. Greek Prometheus defies Zeus to provide fire technology to humanity, transforming society but bringing eternal punishment. Mesopotamian Enki warns Atrahasis about approaching flood catastrophe, betraying divine consensus to preserve human survival. Genesis describes serpentine temptation leading Eve to consume knowledge that opens human consciousness while simultaneously bringing exile from paradise. The consistent pattern suggests humanity repeatedly receives wisdom at significant cost, with excessive knowledge too rapidly acquired disrupting cosmic balance and triggering corrective interventions. Why would ancient populations consistently frame knowledge acquisition in these terms? Perhaps because they recognized that their civilizational advances occurred through sudden leaps rather than gradual development. Archaeological evidence confirms that the Neolithic revolution including agriculture, animal domestication, and urban organization emerged almost simultaneously across multiple continents without apparent precedent or developmental phases. Writing systems appear nearly fully formed in Sumer, Egypt and the Indus Valley, not as primitive scratches evolving into sophisticated scripts, but as complex symbolic frameworks immediately integrated with astronomical observations and religious ceremonies. To ancient observers, such rapid advancement may have seemed obviously external in origin, bestowed rather than independently invented. Mythological accounts of gods or watchers teaching humanity may represent attempts to explain sudden technological transformations that appeared to exceed natural human developmental capabilities. Even military technologies follow these patterns of abrupt advancement. Transitions from stone to bronze, and subsequently to iron metallurgy generated such dramatic social upheavals that entire historical periods are classified according to these materials. Civilizations rose and collapsed based on weapons technology access, with mythological traditions frequently attributing these transitions to divine intervention. Greek accounts describe successive ages of gold, silver, bronze, and iron, with each decline connected to knowledge misuse. Hesiod's description of Bronze Age humans as excessively violent and warlike, ultimately destroyed by their own strength, clearly echoes Enochian accounts of Nephilim armed with forbidden knowledge who brought global devastation. Ancient texts contain disturbing hints of technologies exceeding officially acknowledged prehistoric capabilities. Indian epics like the Mahabharata describe Vimanas, flying vehicles transporting warriors through aerial combat, weapons that blazed like solar fire, and explosive devices that leveled entire cities while leaving landscapes barren for generations. Contemporary scholars interpret these as poetic metaphors, yet their descriptions prove hauntingly specific: chariots that roar like thunder, weapons that blind and incinerate everything within vast radiuses, blasts that render entire regions uninhabitable. Could these represent distorted memories of actual advanced devices preserved through oral tradition until transformed into mythological imagery? If so, the global flood catastrophe represents more than divine punishment for moral corruption. It constitutes desperate planetary reset, eliminating technologies too dangerous for continued existence, while preserving only essential knowledge necessary for species survival. Even megalithic architecture reflects these tensions between preservation and concealment. The impossible stone blocks at Baalbek, the precision fitting at Machu Picchu, the geometric perfection of Giza, each suggests knowledge systems exceeding the technological capabilities of their supposed construction periods. If these monuments represent inheritances from earlier advanced ages, their builders may have been desperately preserving what they could before the next catastrophic cycle arrived. The ancient witnesses left their testimony carved in stone and preserved in myth, warning future generations about the dangers of knowledge without wisdom, technology without spiritual development, and power without cosmic responsibility. The pattern continues repeating throughout human history: advancement, corruption, catastrophe, renewal. We may be approaching another critical transition point where these ancient warnings become immediately relevant to our current civilization's survival. The choice remains ours: learn from preserved testimony about previous cycles, or repeat the same mistakes that brought destruction to our predecessors, whose bones lie buried beneath the stones they left as final warnings. The megalithic monuments scattered across our planet weren't simply architectural achievements designed to demonstrate primitive human capabilities. They represent something far more profound and disturbing, encoded warnings deliberately created by survivors who understood that catastrophic cycles repeat throughout human history. Why would ancient builders align temples with specific stellar positions unless they intended to mark temporal patterns, cosmic clocks designed to signal when destructive cycles might return? Why encode sophisticated mathematical relationships within stone constructions unless they feared that paper records and human memory would be systematically swept away by approaching disasters? These monuments function not merely as engineering marvels, but as permanent repositories of essential information preserved against civilizational collapse. Azazel's account in the Book of Enoch reveals crucial truth about knowledge transmission that reverberates throughout human experience. Those who shared forbidden wisdom with humanity faced severe punishment. The Watchers were bound in subterranean chains until final judgment, their Nephilim offspring eliminated through global flooding. Yet fragments of their dangerous gifts survived the catastrophe. Metallurgy, writing systems, astronomical knowledge all became foundational elements of subsequent civilization. This suggests a carefully managed preservation process where humanity was permitted to retain just enough advanced knowledge to rebuild functional societies, but not sufficient information to repeat the catastrophic mistakes that destroyed the previous world order. This represents cosmic-level quality controls maintaining technological and cultural progress, while preventing access to the most dangerous capabilities that triggered previous destructions. The duality of knowledge as simultaneous gift and curse permeates every mythological tradition. The serpent opens human consciousness but brings exile from paradise. Prometheus provides transformative fire technology but suffers eternal punishment. The Watchers offer advanced wisdom but doom their hybrid children to destruction. The consistent message proves unmistakable. Wisdom always carries significant costs, and those who bestow it pay prices as heavy as those who receive it. Without these forbidden knowledge transfers, humanity would have remained in primitive darkness, yet each advancement introduces shadows of potential loss. This paradox explains why mythological narratives maintain such psychological power across millennia and DOS. They remind us that progress never comes without sacrifice, that every developmental step forward carries inherent risks of catastrophic reversal. When we examine our contemporary technological situation, the parallels prove deeply unsettling. Modern civilization wields knowledge capable of genetic manipulation, atomic energy, and interstellar exploration. Each capability carries identical double-edged characteristics described in ancient accounts. Are we unconsciously repeating historical patterns, inheriting wisdom too powerful for our spiritual and ethical development to handle responsibly? If global flood catastrophe was designed as planetary reset mechanism, then preserved mythological accounts may be warning that such resets recur repeatedly whenever technological knowledge exceeds moral wisdom. The winds moving through ancient temple ruins seem to whisper across millennia, remember what was lost, remember why it was lost. For knowledge without balance leads not to illumination, but to fire, flood, and eternal silence. Beyond forbidden knowledge lies an even deeper mystery. The deliberate concealment of wisdom that was intentionally locked away in stone repositories guarded by priestly hierarchies or buried beneath desert sands to await future ages when humanity might prove capable of handling such information responsibly. This systematic secrecy, whether implemented through divine decree or human choice, represents one of the most enduring enigmas preserved in ancient literature. Enoch's visions describe heavenly tablets containing cosmic laws, stellar calendars, and prophecies spanning multiple world ages. These tablets were characterized as indestructible, inscribed not on organic materials, but on substances immune to decay or destruction. Some interpret these as metaphorical representations of divine order. Others recognize descriptions that sound remarkably similar to advanced data storage technology, crystalline information systems designed to survive planetary catastrophes. If such artifacts actually existed, their current location remains unknown. Legends suggest they were hidden in sacred sanctuaries, sealed within mountain chambers, or placed beneath the Earth's surface to await discovery only when humanity achieved sufficient maturity. Egyptian traditions describe Thoth's sanctuary Maita, a chamber beneath desert sands containing sacred scrolls with stellar secrets and divine knowledge. Greek writers repeated these accounts, claiming Hermes Trismegistus placed books within pyramid structures to preserve them for future civilizations. Arab chroniclers echoed identical narratives, identifying Idris Enoch with Hermes, while suggesting the Great Pyramid itself functioned as a vault containing hidden wisdom. Whether these accounts should be interpreted symbolically or literally, they consistently insist that essential knowledge was deliberately preserved against destructive forces through intentional concealment rather than public distribution. Similar preservation narratives appear throughout global traditions. Indian Vedic texts describe hidden Naga cities where serpent beings guard treasures and wisdom in subterranean realms. Mesoamerican mythology tells of caves leading to Axabulba, the underworld, where lords of knowledge maintain their domains. Andean legends describe tunnel systems beneath Lake Titicaca, where golden records containing crucial information remain stored. Even Hebrew scriptural tradition describes the Ark of the Covenant as containing law tablets while radiating power so dangerous that unauthorized contact resulted in instant death. This represents knowledge that was simultaneously guarded, concealed, and weaponized, Mickey's wisdom too powerful to be accessible without proper authorization and preparation. Why would advanced information require such elaborate security measures? Perhaps because certain knowledge proves catastrophically dangerous when accessed prematurely or by inadequately prepared recipients. The Book of Enoch demonstrates this principle directly by teaching technologies that produced bloodshed and spiritual contamination. To prevent repetition of such disasters, survivors may have chosen to carefully control access to preserved wisdom, ensuring it wouldn't be released until global conditions were appropriate. Alternatively, knowledge secrecy may have simply represented power maintenance information hoarded by priestly classes to sustain authority over general populations. Regardless of motivation, the consistent result was incomplete knowledge inheritance. Humanity received developmental fragments while other essential pieces remained locked away in hidden repositories. Archaeological investigation occasionally encounters evidence supporting these preservation theories. Mesopotamian libraries like Ashurbanipal's contained thousands of clay tablets, many broken, missing, or untranslated, including texts describing astronomical and medical knowledge that exceeded their supposed historical capabilities. Egyptian inventory stele suggest pyramid construction preceded Khufu's reign, contradicting established chronological frameworks. Sites like Durinkhuyu in Turkey reveal vast underground city complexes extending for miles beneath the surface, their original builders unknown and their purposes unexplained. Were these merely defensive refuges or sophisticated vaults designed to protect something far more valuable than human populations? Even legendary lost civilizations connect to knowledge preservation themes. Plato's Atlantis represented not only a powerful society, but one possessing incredibly dangerous technologies. Its destruction constituted punishment for arrogance and power misuse. Yet Plato insisted his account preserved authentic history transmitted through Egyptian priests who remembered ages preceding their own civilization. Whether Atlantis existed physically or functioned as allegorical warning, its narrative role mirrors Enochian watchers, cautioning that knowledge, when abused, brings inevitable ruin to those who wield it irresponsibly. Perhaps the greatest mystery isn't that wisdom was hidden, but that fragments continue resurfacing throughout history. Ancient maps like the Piri Reis chart display Antarctic coastlines centuries before official exploration. Megalithic sites demonstrate celestial alignments requiring advanced astronomical knowledge. Mythological texts describe flying vehicles and fire weapons that sound like distorted memories of sophisticated technologies. Either our ancestors possessed capabilities far exceeding conventional estimates, or they inherited scattered pieces of something much greater, meatless fragments of comprehensive knowledge systems that were once unified, but became dispersed across time following catastrophic disruption. This places contemporary humanity in a peculiar position. We function as heirs to both preserved gifts and concealed secrets. You taught sufficient information to construct civilizations, but denied enough knowledge to maintain persistent curiosity. The silence of megalithic stones, whispers embedded in mythological accounts, and gaps in historical records all suggest that entities divine, extraterrestrial, or simply human made deliberate decisions about what information we would be permitted to access. Whether these knowledge controllers represented benevolent guardians or manipulative authorities, Their influence created a world shaped as much by forgotten information as by remembered truth. During quiet nocturnal hours when stellar patterns emerge overhead, it becomes tempting to imagine those hidden chambers and sealed tablets waiting beneath desert sands or mountain caves, containing answers to questions humanity has barely begun to formulate. If such repositories exist, they may hold solutions to fundamental mysteries. Who guided our development? Why were we selectively educated? Most importantly, what additional knowledge was left behind, concealed until the next cycle of flood and fire sweeps away current civilization to prepare for humanity's next developmental phase? This concept of hidden knowledge inevitably connects to secret societies and mystery schools throughout history, organizations claiming to preserve fragments of ancient wisdom against the erosion of time and cultural change. If post-flood sages scattered seeds of essential knowledge globally, these societies may have functioned as cultivation gardens, ensuring crucial information wouldn't be completely lost. Their elaborate rituals, symbolic systems, and initiation procedures might appear unnecessarily complex, but beneath surface complexity lies evidence of continuity stretching backward to the age of giants and gods. Egyptian priesthoods controlled temple sanctuaries where sacred texts were maintained by individuals who weren't merely ceremonial functionaries, but mathematicians, astronomers, and engineers inheriting knowledge from Zep-Tepi-Nesun. Greek writers marveled that Egyptian priests could calculate celestial cycles spanning millennia with precision that seemed to preserve memories older than Egypt's most ancient monuments. This tradition appears to flow into Greek mystery schools where Hermes Trismegistus, described as simultaneously divine and human Mishas, became the source of Hermetic teachings, describing a cosmos infused with divine mathematical order, where humans could ascend through knowledge to approximate godlike capabilities. Whether Hermes represented literary invention or preserved memory combining Thoth and Enoch, the essential message remained consistent. Wisdom must be carefully veiled, revealed only to recipients adequately prepared to handle such information responsibly. Pythagorean mystery schools surrounded mathematics with elaborate secrecy and ritual frameworks, treating numbers not as mere quantities, but as sacred realities providing keys for understanding universal structure. Their disciples swore binding oaths of silence, approaching geometry and harmonic relationships as spiritual revelations requiring protective discretion. To contemporary observers, such precautions seem unnecessarily dramatic, but perhaps they preserved ancient recognition that knowledge represented not only empowerment but potential danger requiring careful protection from unprepared recipients. Later Gnostic traditions taught that hidden knowledge, gnosis, provided the pathway to spiritual liberation, describing archons as rulers who maintained human enslavement through deliberate ignorance while divine sparks within human consciousness could be awakened through secret teachings. Stripped of theological language, these concepts echo identical themes: knowledge withheld by authorities, knowledge dangerous to existing power structures, knowledge capable of fundamentally transforming human consciousness. Medieval European organizations, Knights Templar, Rosicrucians, Freemasons, were consistently accused of guarding secrets inherited from Egyptian, Jerusalem, or Babylonian sources. Their symbolic systems, all-seeing eyes, compass and square, twin pillars hint at cosmic order, sacred geometry and historical continuity that transcends conventional religious boundaries. Whether these groups actually possessed such knowledge or merely claimed inherited legitimacy, the persistent idea of hidden wisdom continued shaping societies through subtle but powerful influences across centuries. This matters because it demonstrates that mythological accounts of watchers, Nephilim, and wisdom-keeping sages didn't simply vanish into historical obscurity. Instead, they resurfaced repeatedly, preserved through ritual traditions, maintained in fragmentary texts, transmitted through whispered teachings, waiting for moments when humanity could glimpse them once more. Global flood catastrophe may have eliminated physical civilization, but its essential information survived through secret lineages, hidden repositories, and coded transmissions that ensured crucial knowledge would remain accessible for future developmental phases. Consider also the prophetic dimensions of preserved accounts. The Book of Enoch overflows with visions of coming events, final judgment, and cyclical repetition. Many cultures maintain similar prophetic traditions. Mayan calendrical predictions of age transitions and renewals, Norse visions of Ragnarok representing cosmic destruction and rebirth, Hindu cosmological cycles describing endless yugas of creation and dissolution. Each tradition insists that history follows cyclical rather than linear patterns, catastrophes return predictably, and knowledge from previous phases will prove essential when cycles complete their rotations. Secret societies may not have preserved wisdom merely for intellectual curiosity, but for species survival during transitional periods. Modern archaeological investigation occasionally encounters evidence supporting this historical continuity. South American tunnel systems connect ancient temples across impossible distances for unknown purposes. Tibetan lamas describe hidden Himalayan cities where wisdom from past ages remains guarded until humanity demonstrates readiness for such information. Middle Eastern legends of emerald tablets, indestructible records attributed to Hermes, continue surfacing throughout contemporary esoteric literature. The consistent theme remains unchanged. Essential knowledge exists in concealment, awaiting appropriate circumstances for revelation. Perhaps this explains mythological persistence across millennia. These accounts function not as entertainment, but as encryption necessary concealing truths too dangerous, strange, or precious for direct statement. Reading them literally misses deeper significance, while dismissing them as fantasy ignores their remarkable durability and cross-cultural consistency. They represent coded messages scattered throughout human culture, waiting for recipients willing to piece together fragmented information into coherent understanding. When viewed across historical sweeps, ruins, fragments, and legends may not represent random relics of forgotten civilizations, but deliberate trail markers left by ancestors who understood that cycles repeat, floods return, and only those who remember survive. This creates a haunting possibility. The story of Enoch, Watchers, Nephilim, and post-flood sages represents not merely our past, but our approaching future. Hidden knowledge preserved in temples, texts, and secret organizations may have been maintained specifically for times yet to come. The global flood may not have been history's conclusion. It may have been humanity's warning about patterns that continue repeating until we demonstrate sufficient wisdom to break the cycle permanently. If preserved knowledge was intended for future ages, the crucial question becomes what exactly was being so carefully guarded. Mythological traditions and secret teachings hint at far more than moral lessons or symbolic wisdom. They suggest sciences, technologies, and cosmological understanding that surpass conventional expectations about ancient capabilities. Considering this possibility means imagining that fragments of lost civilizations' achievements were deliberately scattered into mythology, encoded in ritual and hidden in sacred sites, waiting for recognition by future generations capable of understanding and properly utilizing such information. The astronomical knowledge preserved in ancient texts provides the clearest example of this sophisticated information preservation. Complex celestial calculations, precise planetary cycles, and stellar navigation techniques appear in cultures that supposedly lacked basic mathematical tools, suggesting inheritance from much more advanced sources than conventional history acknowledges. The pattern continues repeating: advancement, corruption, catastrophe, renewal, with each cycle preserving essential fragments while eliminating dangerous excesses. We may currently be approaching another critical transition point where these ancient warnings become immediately relevant to our civilization's survival. The testimony has been preserved across stone monuments, mythological accounts, and secret traditions. The evidence remains scattered but recoverable for those willing to look beyond comfortable conventional narratives. The choice belongs to each generation: learn from preserved wisdom about cyclical patterns and their consequences, or repeat identical mistakes that brought destruction to our predecessors, whose warnings lie carved in megalithic stone, waiting for humanity to demonstrate sufficient maturity to finally break the cycle of cosmic catastrophe and conscious renewal. The astronomical knowledge preserved in ancient civilizations reveals the most compelling evidence that fragments of advanced scientific understanding survived global catastrophe through careful preservation efforts. These weren't primitive societies gradually discovering celestial mechanics through trial and error. They possessed sophisticated computational abilities that continue to astound contemporary scholars. Sumerian astronomers mapped planetary motions with precision, distinguishing celestial bodies from fixed stars while recording cycles spanning thousands of years with mathematical accuracy that required advanced observational techniques and data compilation methods. Egyptian architects aligned temples and pyramids to Orion and Sirius constellations, measuring stellar rising patterns with uncanny precision that demanded understanding of precession cycles spanning millennia. Mayan calendar systems achieved accuracy rivaling modern atomic measurements, predicting eclipses centuries in advance using calculations that demonstrate mastery of complex astronomical mathematics, supposedly unknown to pre-technological civilizations. How did societies allegedly emerging from primitive hunter-gatherer conditions master such sophisticated knowledge so rapidly after the flood period? Mythological accounts provide consistent explanations. They were systematically taught by non-human intelligences. The Watchers, Anunnaki, and wisdom-keeping sages described throughout global traditions were characterized as masters of celestial sciences who descended from stellar realms to impart essential knowledge before departing once again to their cosmic domains. Mathematical knowledge follows identical patterns of impossible sophistication. The Great Pyramid encodes precise values of pirs and the golden ratio within its structural proportions, mathematical constants that conventional history claims weren't discovered until much later periods. Teotihuacan's urban layout reflects astronomical measurement units that correspond to celestial distances and planetary cycles. Indian Vedic texts describe vast temporal cycles called yugas spanning thousands and millions of years, echoing contemporary cosmological understanding of deep time scales that primitive cultures shouldn't have possessed. Were these remarkable coincidences, or preserved remnants of comprehensive knowledge systems transmitted through mythological narratives and megalithic architecture? Medical knowledge displays similarly anomalous advancement. The Book of Enoch accuses Watchers of teaching root-cutting, might a sophisticated use of plants for healing and pharmaceutical applications. Sumerian tablets document surgical instruments and medical treatments that demonstrate understanding of complex anatomical and pharmacological principles. Egyptian mummification processes employed chemical preservation techniques using resins and compounds that modern science has only recently analyzed and understood. Indian Ayurvedic texts ascribe surgical procedures, anesthesia applications, and herbal remedies thousands of years before similar medical advances appeared in European traditions. If this knowledge represented inherited wisdom rather than independent discovery, it may constitute only fragmentary preservation of much more comprehensive medical understanding that existed in pre-flood civilizations. Even more disturbing are mythological descriptions of technologies resembling contemporary capabilities. Indian epics described Vaimanas flying vehicles armed with weapons of light that could traverse vast distances and engage in aerial combat. The Mahabharata depicts weapons that blazed like many suns, scorching landscapes and blinding warriors with descriptions disturbingly similar to nuclear devastation effects. Mesopotamian accounts describe mysterious objects, devices of power that controlled domains ranging from music to warfare through technological means. Greek mythology tells of Hephaestus forging automatons, mechanical beings that serve divine masters with apparent artificial intelligence capabilities. Were these pure imagination or distorted memories of actual machines from earlier technological civilizations, interpreted through primitive linguistic frameworks that lacked adequate vocabulary for describing advanced equipment? Archaeological anomalies continue deepening these mysteries. Out-of-place artifacts like the Antikythera mechanism's sophisticated gear systems, Parthian jar batteries, and ancient maps showing Antarctica ice-free suggest knowledge synchronization problems with conventional historical timelines. Each discovery faces academic debate and frequent dismissal, but collectively they form patterns that echo mythological accounts, glimpses of lost sciences whose fragments prove too persistent to ignore completely. This raises fundamental questions about knowledge preservation and loss. Why did such sophisticated understanding disappear from human accessibility? The global flood provides the simplest explanation: catastrophic destruction, eliminated civilizations, drowned cities, and scattered survivors across hostile landscapes, where maintaining complex knowledge systems became impossible. But mythological traditions also suggest deliberate suppression. Divine authorities, angered by humanity's corruption and misuse of advanced capabilities, withdrew their technological gifts. Punished Watchers left their wisdom incomplete. Post-flood survivors may have consciously chosen to preserve only essential fragments, fearing that complete knowledge restoration might trigger repetition of previous disasters. This interpretation transforms human civilizational development from linear progression to cyclical inheritance, each phase representing recovery from previous collapse, rather than independent advancement. What we interpret as invention may actually constitute remembrance, the rediscovery of principles and techniques known in earlier ages, but deliberately concealed or accidentally lost. If accurate, contemporary technological capabilities may not represent unprecedented human achievement, but rediscovery of paths previously explored with catastrophic consequences. We may be unconsciously retracing developmental routes that our predecessors followed toward their ultimate destruction, unaware of how those previous cycles concluded. The haunting possibility emerges that mythological warnings aren't metaphorical teachings about pride and hubris, but preserved historical memories of actual knowledge misuse. When Enoch describes watchers teaching metallurgy and warfare, when Indian epics warn of weapons that scorch landscapes, when Greek narratives portray divine punishment for technological overreach, perhaps these represent authentic accounts of advanced capabilities that were abused until corrective interventions became necessary. Perhaps the flood, mass extinctions, and exile of wisdom keepers represented desperate attempts to reset civilizations spiraling beyond sustainable control. As we examine our current global situation, Misha armed with weapons capable of ending human civilization, developing technologies advancing faster than ethical wisdom, facing environmental consequences of unchecked industrial expansion. The parallels prove deeply unsettling. Are we unconsciously replaying ancient cycles? Will our monuments, machines, and cultural achievements eventually be dismissed as mythology by future survivors who rebuild among our ruins, while preserving whispered legends of gods who brought both fire and flood? The stars remain overhead, unchanged witnesses to these recurring patterns. The same celestial configurations observed by Enoch, Sumerian priests, and Mayan astronomers continue their eternal rotations, reminding us of cosmic continuity that transcends terrestrial catastrophes. If hidden knowledge was preserved through previous transitions, perhaps it awaits rediscovery not in sealed chambers or buried scrolls, but encoded within the heavens themselves, stellar patterns that rise and set with tireless precision, maintaining cosmic order that our ancestors sought to preserve through megalithic alignments and mythological narratives. To observe celestial phenomena is to witness what ancient wisdom keepers observed, glimpsing the universal frameworks they desperately attempted to maintain through stone monuments and symbolic teaching systems. The crucial question confronting contemporary humanity involves identifying the keepers of preserved knowledge and understanding what became of their legacy. Global mythological traditions suggest that while most extraordinary beings, giants, watchers, divine entity, mythas vanished during flood catastrophe, or were bound in otherworldly prisons, selected representatives remained among human populations, hidden in plain sight through bloodlines, dynasties, and secret lineages, claiming descent from more than human sources. Mesopotamian kingship allegedly descended directly from Anunnaki genetic lines. Sumerian king lists record rulers whose lifespans lasted thousands of years before flood events, subsequently shortening as mortality increased among hybrid populations. These figures were described not as ordinary humans, but as semi-divine shepherds chosen to guide human development according to cosmic protocols. Egyptian pharaohs weren't merely political rulers, but embodied gods on earth whose authority derived from direct lineage connections to Ra, Horus, and Osiris. Chinese emperors styled themselves as sons of heaven, legitimizing their power through celestial mandates. Mesoamerican rulers claimed descent from Quetzalcoatl or Viracocha, carrying divine genetic inheritance that justified their extraordinary capabilities. The consistent global pattern suggests political authority was universally legitimized through claims of otherworldly origin, rather than emerging through natural social evolution. Could these lineage claims represent more than symbolic metaphor? Genetic memory represents an intriguing scientific concept, the possibility that experiential fragments can be transmitted through DNA inheritance patterns. If Watchers or Anunnaki actually interbred with human populations, traces of their legacy might persist in ways that exceed current understanding. Perhaps extraordinary lifespans recorded in ancient texts or sudden appearance of genius-level capabilities in art and science represent genetic echoes of something preserved through hidden bloodlines that continue influencing human development. At minimum, mythological traditions insist that humanity doesn't represent a closed genetic system minus external genetic contributions, left permanent marks still detectable through royal genealogies and cultural memories. European folklore describes Merovingian dynasties rumored to descend from marine entities. Irish rulers traced lineage to Tuatha De Danann Mia's luminous immortal beings. Middle Eastern traditions speak of tribes descended from Nephilim survivors. Even biblical texts preserve cryptic admissions. There were giants in the earth in those days and also after that, acknowledging that traces of these beings endured beyond flood destruction. If descendants walked among human populations, concealment may have represented survival necessity rather than deceptive strategy. Revealing otherworldly origins would invite fear or violence from purely human populations. Better to maintain protective camouflage through priestly or monarchical symbols while preserving essential knowledge through temple rituals and bloodline inheritance. Secret societies may represent institutional echoes of this survival instinctos. Their elaborate initiations and binding oaths preserving memories from ages when knowledge was genuinely dangerous and power derived from bridging heavenly and earthly realms. But survival may not have been limited to physical inheritance. Many traditions suggest that even when bodies perished, spiritual essences endured. The Book of Enoch claims Nephilim souls became wandering entities, unable to return to celestial or terrestrial homes, condemned to influence humanity as disembodied forces. Other mythological accounts describe Shining Ones, the spiritual beings who continue guiding or deceiving human development from invisible dimensions. Greek heroes of semi-divine heritage were often elevated to stellar configurations after death, their influence immortalized through constellation patterns. If accurate, then the legacy of giants and wisdom keepers extends beyond physical monuments and genetic inheritance to include unseen forces that continue shaping human imagination and cultural development. Hidden realm traditions suggest additional survival possibilities. Mythological accounts describe underworlds not as places of death, but as refuges where extraordinary beings maintain their civilizations. Indian Nagas allegedly dwell in subterranean palaces of gold and light. Tuatha De Danann supposedly retreated into hidden dimensions beneath hills and mounds. Tibetan traditions tell of Shambhala Mool concealed Himalayan kingdoms where ancient wisdom remains preserved. Could these represent metaphorical descriptions of forgotten cultures, or authentic memories of survival refuges where advanced societies endured flood catastrophes in secret locations, occasionally surfacing as teachers or rulers before fading again into concealment? Contemporary accounts continue reporting encounters in remote regions, giant beings in Afghanistan, unusual mummies in China's Tarim Basin, megalithic ruins in inaccessible jungle or desert locations. While dismissed as legends, these reports echo identical themes: survivors, hidden lineages, remnants of beings who once walked openly among human populations. This suggests humanity's developmental story remains fundamentally incomplete. We may not represent simple products of random evolution or divine creation, but heirs to complex interactions with external intelligences remembered through mythology as gods, giants, or wisdom-keeping sages. Their physical presence may have withdrawn, but their influence persists through our stories, architectural ruins, symbolic systems, and possibly genetic inheritance patterns. Tracing this influence reveals truths too vast for conventional historical frameworks, while suggesting that survival in hidden forms means they may continue observing, waiting, and guiding human development in ways we don't consciously recognize. Mythology may preserve not merely historical memory, but living inheritance that whispers across generations, reminding us that boundaries between mortal and divine consciousness were once far more permeable than contemporary institutional authorities permit us to acknowledge. The greatest legacy of ancient knowledge keepers may reside not in royal bloodlines or architectural monuments, but in mythological narratives that shaped humanity's cosmic imagination. When we direct attention skyward, identical patterns repeat endlessly, mythological traditions connecting human origins, not merely to terrestrial evolution but to stellar sources. Watchers descended from heavenly realms. Anunnaki originated from distant planetary systems like Nibiru. Egyptian, Indian, and Mesoamerican sages were portrayed as radiant beings shining with solar brilliance. Even giants, despite their violent characteristics, were frequently linked to constellation patterns or celestial events, as if memory of cosmic connections could never be completely erased. Regardless of how many floods swept terrestrial surfaces, stars themselves provide enduring reference points. After temples crumble and scrolls decay, Orion continues rising, Sirius maintains its brilliant burning, the Pleiades persist in their jewel-like shimmer. Ancient populations encoded essential information into constellation patterns so their most crucial knowledge would outlast stone monuments and written records. The Book of Job asks, "Can you bind the chains of the Pleiades? Can you loosen Orion's belt?" These words echo reverence seen throughout Sumerian texts, where stars represented dwelling places of gods. Egyptians aligned pyramids to Orion and Sirius because they believed pharaohs would ascend to join divine stellar communities after death. Greek mythology transformed heroes like Perseus and Heracles into star patterns following their terrestrial deaths. Consistently, the sky was treated not as distant decoration, but as memory mapping mind us permanent reminders that human consciousness originated elsewhere and may return to cosmic sources. Modern astronomy has uncovered disturbing confirmations of ancient stellar knowledge. The Dogon's precise understanding of Sirius B's invisible companion star cannot be explained through naked eye observation alone. Ancient megalithic structures from Britain to Cambodia demonstrate alignments with equinoxes, solstices, and planetary cycles measured across centuries of careful observation. These alignments suggest not merely accumulated astronomical data, but possible inheritance of comprehensive celestial knowledge from sources exceeding primitive observational capabilities. Could the Watchers, Anunnaki, or post-flood sages have been cosmic scientists whose advanced understanding was embedded in mythological frameworks so that even when detailed memory failed, stellar patterns themselves would continue providing essential reminders? Mythological traditions also emphasize cyclical return rather than permanent departure. Quetzalcoatl promised future reappearance from across oceanic distances. Viracocha vanished with expectations of eventual return. Anunnaki allegedly vowed to resume contact when Nibiru's orbital cycle brought it proximate again. Even Enoch, translated to heavenly dimensions, was prophesied to accompany final judgment at historical conclusion. These aren't narratives of permanent abandonment, but temporary absence with guaranteed renewal. Whether interpreted literally or symbolically, they maintained active expectation that humanity's developmental story remains unfinished, that ancient teachers may eventually resume direct contact with human populations. If such return were authentic, what implications would emerge? Would contemporary humanity welcome them as divine guides, following ancestral precedents of awestruck submission to superior knowledge and capabilities? Or would we resist, having learned caution about repeating corruption and violence cycles that previously demanded catastrophic correction? Mythological accounts don't provide clear guidance, but consistently emphasize that such encounters carry double-edged consequences. Receiving advanced knowledge simultaneously risks civilizational destruction. Technological elevation inevitably includes moral judgment. The Watchers who originally descended brought both wisdom and doom. Their hybrid children became monsters requiring elimination. Post-flood sages preserved essential survival information, but often at costs involving permanent secrecy. Hypothetical return wouldn't represent simple restoration, but reopening of ancient wounds and repetition of dangerous cycles. Perhaps mythology's authentic purpose involves warning future generations rather than merely describing past events, reminding us that we've traversed these developmental paths previously, that we're not the first to master advanced knowledge or the first to misuse such capabilities catastrophically. Global catastrophes occur when cosmic balance is disrupted, and only carefully selected fragments endure such transitions. The promise of return may describe less about entities descending from sky realms and more about cyclical patterns themselves returning Miser. Another flood, another opportunity to begin again with preserved wisdom. Yet within these sobering warnings lies persistent hope. Survivors always endure catastrophic transitions. Wisdom keepers always appear when needed. Essential knowledge never faces complete destruction, but awaits rediscovery through patient investigation. Humanity, though fragile, carries forward indestructible consciousness that even planetary floods cannot extinguish. Whether the Watchers represented angels, extraterrestrials, or archetypal symbols, their narrative insists that we transcend mere biological evolution stumbling through cosmic darkness. We are beings shaped by contact with divine intelligence, for beneficial and detrimental consequences. Our ultimate destiny remains connected to stellar origins observable overhead. As contemporary civilization advances with telescopes revealing galactic structures and instruments probing atomic foundations, we find ourselves approaching Enoch's visionary perspective, mortal consciousness, glimpsing creation's underlying mechanisms. The fundamental danger remains identical. Will we utilize this knowledge for conscious evolution or unconscious destruction? Mythological wisdom whispers that our response determines not only civilization's future, but the timing of the next developmental cycle. The epic story that began with whispers from forgotten scrolls now encompasses continents threading through temples, ruins, and stellar configurations. We have followed Watchers as they descended to Earth, violating cosmic boundaries while shaping humanity through simultaneously wondrous and terrible interventions. We have walked among their children, to towering Nephilim, whose appetites and violence brought global chaos. We have witnessed post-flood sages preserving essential knowledge fragments while guiding scattered survivors toward renewed civilization. We have stood before monuments they inspired, massive stones aligned with heavenly patterns, silent messages carved into planetary foundations. Throughout this investigation, the central question persists: are these merely mythological fantasies, or preserved memories of truths too extraordinary for conventional historical frameworks? Perhaps the answer transcends choosing between literal and symbolic interpretations, recognizing that mythology represents history remembered through symbolic language. Dismissing these accounts as pure fantasy ignores their persistence across every culture spanning oceans and centuries. Accepting them as completely literal misses the poetic frameworks through which our ancestors clothed truths too vast for direct expression. The Book of Enoch, Mesopotamian epics, Egyptian mysteries, and global flood traditions represent different languages telling identical stories. Humanity is not alone in cosmic development. We are shaped by forces beyond terrestrial origin, and every developmental age rises from previous collapse. The flood transcends singular historical event, becomes symbolic representation of eternal cycles defining existence itself. Knowledge accumulates, corruption spreads, catastrophe strikes, and from wreckage selected remnants begin again. Each transition features wisdom keepers providing guidance, monuments created for remembrance, and mythological warnings preserved for future generations. We currently inhabit such a cycle, possessing knowledge capable of healing or destroying entire civilizations, facing choices that mirror those confronted by the Watchers. The danger remains identical, mistaking technological power for authentic wisdom, misusing capabilities until corrective judgment becomes inevitable. The warnings persist clearly, might written not merely in ancient scriptures but encoded in megalithic stone and stellar patterns. Yet hope endures simultaneously. Mythological narratives don't conclude in permanent silence. Wisdom keepers consistently return when needed. Survivors always endure catastrophic transitions. Essential consciousness never faces complete extinguishment. Even if technological civilizations collapse completely, essential fragments remain mind and whispers, architectural ruins, symbolic systems waiting to reignite imagination during subsequent cycles. Humanity demonstrates fragility yet resilience, eternally reaching skyward, perpetually searching celestial realms for memories of our authentic origins. Perhaps eventually we will rediscover what was lost through patient synthesis of archaeological evidence, astronomical observation, and mythological preservation. Perhaps we're already accomplishing this recovery by piecing together scattered truths from multiple investigative approaches. Or perhaps we're destined to retrace identical developmental paths repeatedly, cycling through the same patterns until we achieve sustainable balance between knowledge acquisition and wisdom application. Whatever the ultimate resolution, mythological traditions remind us that we transcend mere dust and coincidence. We are inheritors of stories older than recorded history, narratives involving gods and giants, floods and fires, wisdom hidden and revealed across cosmic transitions. As night deepens and stars assume their eternal positions overhead, we face fundamental choices: dismiss these accounts as primitive dreams, or recognize within them faint outlines of forgotten truths. The whispers of Enoch, ruins of ancient civilizations, and memories of floods and wisdom keepers all indicate a past richer, stranger, and more cosmically connected than contemporary institutions encourage us to imagine. To listen carefully is to remember authentically. To remember genuinely is to awaken consciously. To awaken fully is to recognize that our story remains unfinished. You're merely the latest chapter in cycles as ancient as time itself, with the next turning point approaching faster than anyone dares to acknowledge. The choice belongs to each generation. Learn from preserved testimony about cyclical consequences, or repeat identical mistakes that brought catastrophic destruction to predecessors whose warnings lie carved in stone and written in stars, waiting for humanity to demonstrate sufficient maturity to finally transcend the eternal return of cosmic catastrophe and conscious renewal.